Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the public hearing on the fiscal year 2025 budget. We'll begin tonight with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me. The flag is in the back. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, I'm going to come over. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the public hearing. This will be the first. We anticipate a second public hearing on April 16th. I'm Lisa Hevner. I'm chair of the Board of Finance, and I want to thank members of the Board of Finance who are here with us tonight. We've got Todd Burke, Mike Doyle, Bert Helfand, Art Wallace, and Art House is on his way. He's teaching a class and will be here as soon as his class is over. We extend our sincere thanks to members of the Board of Selectmen and Education, to the Director of Finance, Amy Merriweather, Budget Director, Melissa Appleby, Tom Fitzgerald, Town Manager, Mark Nelson, Superintendent of Schools, Matt Curtis, town and school staff, board and commission members, citizens and stakeholders who have worked and contributed to this year's budget. I'm going to begin tonight's presentation with an overview. Then we'll go to Jeff Tyndall, who is chair of the Board of Education. We'll conclude with Wendy Maxudis, first select woman, who will speak about the town and capital budgets. And then we'll then hear from you. After we hear from citizens, we'll go on to budget discussions among the Board of Finance. So I will begin. The town charter gives ultimate responsibility for the budget to the residents of Simsbury, who must approve the budget at referendum. The charter requires the Board of Finance to approve a balanced budget for residents to consider. There are several steps in this process. The Board of Finance must hold, per the charter, a public hearing on the budgets as proposed by the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education before changes are made. That hearing is tonight. The Board of Finance approves a bottom line budget for the Board of Education and a line item budget for the Board of Selectmen. That means we are authorized to remove specific spending items from the Board of Selectmen budget. For the Board of Education, we may reduce the total amount, but may not address individual line items. If the budgets are approved in referendum, the Board of Finance sets a mill rate sufficient to pay approved expenses. Because the mill rate is not finalized until after referendum in May, the mill rate being discussed tonight is just an estimate. Our town budget is like a three-legged stool. The Board of Education provides our children with high-quality education programs for which Simsbury is known. The Board of Selectmen delivers public safety, sound infrastructure, a quality of life that includes beautiful parks, open spaces, the library, the senior center, recreation, and other key services. The budgets reflect a combination of expenses we are legally obligated to fund, those are called mandates, and the costs of what the public needs and wants. But it's all made possible by the taxes we pay. It only works if we keep all three legs of the stool in balance. The town and schools can't offer more than residents are willing and able to pay. Collectively, all of us try to respond to citizen preferences while controlling expenses as much as possible, and therein lies the challenge of local government. This year, determining the right balance is difficult. The proposed tax increase is higher than the current 3.2% rate of inflation and higher than the 3.2% Social Security Cost of Living Adjustment, or COLA, for seniors. The COLA serves as an important measure of what residents on a fixed income can afford. We will hear tonight about offers a high-level look of where we are in the budget process tonight. The boards of Selectmen and Education have proposed about $5.5 million in new spending. The town receives revenues from sources other than taxes, but we are projecting a decrease of about $700,000 in the amount of these non-tax revenues from last year. The grand list is a roster that shows the total value of property that is subject to the property tax. When the grand list grows, the tax rate can be reduced. This year, the grand list has minimal growth, 0.6. It's essentially flat. Taking all that into consideration, the proposed budgets would need to be funded by a mill rate of 33.89. This estimate includes a fire district mill rate of 1.05, and it represents a tax increase of 6.51%. The budget is a work in process, and the numbers presented tonight are not final. The budgets must be approved by the Board of Finance and then citizens at referendum. The Board of Finance at past meetings has indicated a strong preference to keep the tax increase below 5%, and we have been evaluating the use of reserves, revenues, and other financial mechanisms to attain this outcome. We anticipate changes before the budget approvals and referendum. We invite all of you to stay after the public hearing as we begin those discussions. This slide shows how the projected mill rate will affect taxes on a median home value of $390,800. It will produce a tax increase of $566. On this slide, we see the effect of the projected tax increases at 6.51%, where we are, and 4.99%, where the Board of Finance hopes to get to, on homes of different values. If the Board of Finance is able to reduce the proposed tax increase to below 5%, then taxes on a median valued home would go up $435. Better, but still an increase. Budgets reflect what we are trying to accomplish. Much of the town's taxes fund the education budget, then town services and debt service, which is the annual costs associated with the money we have borrowed for capital projects like renovating Latimer Lane. This slide gives us an idea of what is driving this year's tax increase. Spending is increasing $5.5 million. 2/3 of that amount will go to increased spending on education, 15% to the town, and 20% to debt service. Generally, but not always, when spending goes up, taxes go up. Simsbury also has a revenue challenge this year. As I mentioned, Simsbury's grand list is essentially flat. A flat grand list means that net economic development is essentially flat. It is insufficient to cover new spending. Non-tax revenues are also down. Non-tax revenues include fees, interest income, state aid, and fines. There is a little bit of good news. The town invests money that it collects in taxes and hasn't yet spent. Investment income is up this year, and the Board of Selectmen is recommending increasing that projection for next year. The Board of Finance anticipates increasing that projection. The next two slides are fairly detailed, but I am including them for those who have looked at the hearing notice. The hearing notice included the American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA dollars, as part of the Board of Selectmen budget because of federal rules regarding the implementation of the grant. But the inclusion of ARPA makes it a little difficult to visualize an apple-to-apple comparison of tax spending from last year to this year. It looks like, for example, the Board of Selectmen has a 9% reduction, 7%. But these numbers look different when we separate out ARPA. You see ARPA on the bottom. The Board of Selectmen budget funded by taxes is actually increasing, not decreasing, and the total town expenditures funded by taxes is increasing 4.71%, not 1.47%. The main point to make here is the budgets reflect a 6.51% tax increase with or without ARPA being shown. The budgets include over $11 million in spending on major capital projects that are contained in the portion of the budget known as the Capital Improvement Plan, or CIP. These are known as CIP projects. CIP projects are capital projects that cost more than $250,000, and they include infrastructure, building, and large equipment. We pay for these projects with bonding, grants, reserves, taxes, and other resources. The first selectman will walk us through those projects. The budgets also include $2.4 million in minor capital projects. These projects are included in a portion of the budget known as capital non-recurring or CNR projects. CNR projects cost less than $250,000, and these are funded similarly to CIP, except that the town does not borrow for CNR projects. At referendum, citizens approve 3 budgets that are not funded primarily from taxes. They are funded primarily from fees. These include Water Pollution Control Authority or sewers, Simsbury Farms, residential properties, and residential properties. Our long-term obligations are costs of promises the town has made in which we are legally obligated to keep. We fund these items first in every budget. Debt service is the money we owe on loans we have taken out for CIP projects. Pensions and other post-employment benefits are retirement promises we have made to town employees, and we are pleased to report that OPEB is fully funded. Together, these obligations make up about 10% of the budget, which is considered a reasonable and manageable level. When we evaluate this year's budget proposals, we have to consider not only the immediate effect of the tax increase on residents, but also the way our budget can affect the long-term fiscal health of the town. To do that, we keep in mind some budgeting best practices that the Board of Finance has adopted. These are listed here. In large part because of how the town manages its budgets, rating agencies have given Simsbury the highest rating a town can receive, and one that saves the town money on borrowing costs. Another thing we keep in mind when we evaluate the proposed budget is how Simsbury's mill rate compares with our neighboring towns. The relationship between property taxes and business investment is a primary concern. As described by municipal budgeting expert Robert Bland, higher property tax rates diminish economic growth and encourage out-migration of households and businesses. Over the long term, towns with higher than average property tax burdens have lower property values. Every business has a critical point in which differences in tax rates among local governments become significant to its locational decision. And here you can see before changes we're a little bit on the high side, so we're going to try and get that a little more in balance. Here's where we are as of this evening. State law caps the mill rate for motor vehicles at 32.46, so Simsbury will have 2 mill rates this year. The Board of Finance again does expect to make changes to the proposed budgets, and discussions about those changes will begin tonight after the public hearing. We will continue the public hearing to April 16th, at which time citizens will again have an opportunity to comment. Before tonight's hearing, the Board of Finance asked the Boards of Selectmen and Education to reduce budgets they had originally proposed, and both of them did that. I want to acknowledge the thoughtful work the boards and staff did in advance of this hearing to get the numbers lower. The Board of Finance committed to work with the Finance Director to evaluate revenues, reductions, and debt financing to further lower taxes. I want to thank, in particular, Amy Merriweather and Melissa Appleby for their work and assistance with this. After the hearing, the board will evaluate ways, and we anticipate that we will eventually vote on ways to get this tax increase below 5%, or at least close to that goal. Some of the proposals we will be discussing after this hearing include increasing investment income, delaying debt issuance, using reserves, expenditure reductions, primarily in the debt service and the CNR payback line items, limiting future bonding, general fund and capital reserves assignments, which are accounting designations indicating an intent to spend dollars in the future for a specific purpose, and other options as well. And with that, I will turn it over to Jeff Tyndall.
Thank you. Need the readers. I'm just at that age. Good evening, everybody. My name is Jeff Tyndall. I am your chair of the Board of Education. It's my pleasure tonight to present to you our budget for the 2024-25 budget. And really, as Lisa said, I just want to take a second here and acknowledge the superintendent and his team, our board members. We do not take this endeavor, this exercise lightly. We're not only board members, we're taxpayers too. And so there's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, quite literally, that went into tonight. So with that, I'm driving, sorry. I just wanted to ground everybody here. These are the four pillars that we use, that we start with in any budget cycle. Ensuring success for every student, self-explanatory, right? We want every student, no matter age, ability, to have the best and be the best that they possibly can be. Creating compassionate and connected school cultures. Again, right, if the culture, if they feel comfortable, it's proven that scores and their success rate goes up. The premier workforce, again, speaks for itself, and then making very sustainable and strategic capital investments in our community obviously with your support. Again, these are the pillars, the goals that guide us as an organization in the budget planning process. With that, as the chairwoman mentioned, our increase for consideration tonight is a 4.41% increase. It's an increase of $3.6 million, as the slide shows. As I think you'll see, this is a very enrollment-driven budget proposal for tonight. Again, it is driven by enrollment, increasing in a variety of factors, as well as transportation and a few other issues. Sorry. I'm going to break this down into three pieces. One, the context. How did we get here? What drives it? Secondly, the return on investment, right? That's kind of why we're here. We want to make sure that the dollars that we're spending are well spent, right, and prudent and driving success in our school systems. And then really what's behind it? What's driving the increase in kind of how we're here, how we got here today. Okay, first for the context. This is sort of the balancing act that we go through every year, right? Each year we identify themes for the budget development that drive our decision making at the board level. And Lisa mentioned some of these earlier. You know, the budget is responsive to market adjustments and inflation, increased negotiated contract obligations, and enrollment-driven staffing needs. We work hard, again, I want to emphasize that, we work hard to be cognizant of the key data points such as COLA, the mill rate, and the reality that there was no growth in the overall grand list, as was pointed out this year, creating challenges for the taxpayers, and again, including us as board members. As a board, we take this responsibility very seriously and recognize the balance that needs to occur to ensure that we support our outstanding school system in a fiscally responsible manner. Wanted to start here because this is where I'm talking about being an enrollment-driven budget primarily, right? So here's a 5-year in comparison of where we are. Total number of students went up 80 in the last 4 years or 5 years. But really what I want to point out, the second theme is the jump in the special ed population. That's almost a 15% jump in the last 5 years alone. God, those were great years. Okay, so budget development. There have been several stages, as previously mentioned, of the budget development process, starting with a budget workshop back in February and culminating with the revised Board of Education recommendation of 4.41%. Along the way, we made significant reductions to our main drivers listed on this slide in an attempt to offset the new staffing requests that I'll get to, and respond to the input from our partners on the Board of Finance. Return on investment, again, the kind of why we're here. With this slide, I want to start, because this provides you sort of a historical summary of where we're at, right? The top chart there is the per pupil expenditure, right? As you can see, Simsbury is doing we are beating the state average, as well as we are roughly in the middle of the Hartford area towns, the 27 towns that we will compare ourselves to from time to time. On but drilling down on a peer community, and this kind of really actually mirrors the list that the chairwoman showed earlier, you'll see we are second lowest to Farmington in our per pupil expenditure. And again, I thought it mirrored nicely the chart that the chairwoman was saying on the budget proposals for this year, because it actually mirrored that roster exactly. We were the second lowest into Farmington. So we compare, obviously, very favorably, not just to the state, but to our peer communities. And then just on the right, just for another historical perspective, I think it's important to note that our 10-year average is 2.27%, and even our 5-year is a 3.28% budget increase, which I think hopefully proves that we again take this seriously and are very responsible in these budgetary crafting. Again, return on investment, just a couple of more data points for everybody's student growth. It sort of measures out there about kind of how we are from external sources. On the left is the ESPA, you guys might know it previously as SBAC grades. That's really a measure of the grades 3.6, and we come in obviously very favorably at 75.1%. Again, high school, again, very well rated. This is, again, our DERG, or again, these are like communities that we are compared with. Again, fourth on that list. And then one that I'm especially proud of is the one on the right is a ranking on our science programs, and that's a state ranking. That's compared to the state. We come in second amongst our peers on the state level. I think that's something particularly to be proud of. Again, as I mentioned before, we try to do some sustainable and strategic investments. Again, very much appreciated with the support of these boards in the town. We have had a relative goal to sustainable and strategic investments. Over the last several years, obviously, we've been focused on the much-needed Latimer Lane project there. We've discussed the infrastructure challenges that the schools are currently facing, and capital upkeep in the funding of these larger projects will continue to be our focus in planning. In addition, I just wanted to also point out the two other items. The top chart there on the top right. Well, actually, just take a second to take those pictures are of Latimer doing some of those great works, the great renovations that how Latimer is going to look. But on the top right there is kind of how our budget is broken down. And again, I'll get to this, but you'll see salaries are the main driver. And then on the bottom, I just wanted to again acknowledge with the uptick in special ed enrollment over the last few, some of the staffing investments that we have made. Vision of the Graduate, I'm sure you've all heard of this. This is one of our kind of operating missions, right? Our district is proud to have unique opportunities and educational pathways that have developed over the years to support students' areas of passion and interest. Including on the slide are photos of members of our various athletic teams, culinary arts students, engineering, and music. I think it's important to say and stop that these students in these 4 cohorts aren't just participating in these, let's say, 4 buckets. They're really thriving. I mean, think about there's girls basketball just won the state tournament. Our culinary program just placed 3rd at the competition at the Yardgo Stadium. These students are doing really marvelous things right now. And all of these programs enhance the school experience and develop lifelong attributes of our district vision of a graduate. And I truly believe is a true differentiator amongst our peers. Okay, so for the drivers, just mentioned this. As you'll see, the largest portion of our budget on an annual basis is our contractual obligations, salaries, benefits, the like. As you'll see, the cost of our contractual obligations for the next year represent more than a 3% increase. It's really 3.3, as you'll see there, increase to our operating costs. When analyzing our costs, it's important to note that close to 80% of our costs are associated with contractual obligations and benefits. Sorry, I keep hitting the pointer. As you see in your home lives or personal lives, increases in market costs have driven some substantial increases in our budget requests as well. Really, post-COVID transportation costs have risen significantly as we continue to be challenged by the industry trend of limited drivers out there and less flexibility for specialized transportation. We've also seen an increase in utilities and the cost of supplies to support our teachers, students, and custodians. Again, this just shows really a lot of inflation. Currently, due to increases in the number of students placed in specialized settings and the cost of corresponding transportation, we are increasing our outplacement line item to adjust for the current year deficit. It's also, maybe take a second to stop and say, a lot of this also is reflective of move-ins, students coming into the district after the beginning of the school year that we just haven't budgeted for. We're also making adjustments to facilities maintenance, nurse substitutes, and legal line items. Again, all inclusive, really, this requests an additional 1.2 increase with costs moving forward. This is actually a good slide for a positive. We're fortunate this year because we're seeing a smaller recommended increase in the overall health insurance line item. Historically, this is really the second largest driver in our budget. So really 0.49 it's in 0.22 and the health insurance is really exceptional. So this is where the new staffing requests are reflected. This budget supports the addition of 6 full-time positions to respond to the enrollment growth in our specialized programs, right? Increased enrollment means really increased staffing or need for increased staffing. A concentration of staffing is to support the growth and quality of our intensive learning needs program, housed at both Squadron Line as well as Tooten Hills. Really, in summary, this is the main drivers. Again, the majority of our budget increase is contractual obligations. Again, what we pay to have that premier workforce that I started with, one of the 4 pillars. The budget also addressed areas of the budget shortfall in special education related services, such as transportation and tuition costs. Through our reductions, you'll see that the nearly $2 million in reductions and reallocations, we were able to offset the new staffing requests and approve a budget that is very comparative to like communities. So let me stop there. Thank you for your attention and your time, and I will turn it over to Wendy. There you go.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they remind me up and down. Hey, everyone. Thanks for having us tonight. Which way am I going here? Okay, down button. I want to start here. I'm skipping to this slide first because I want to point out the Board of Selectmen members that are all here tonight. Stephen Antonio is Deputy First Selectman. Heather Getz, a ranking member and past board member. Diana Yeisley, Kevin Beal, and Curtis Looney. And I just want to say that we really deliberated over this budget for a full Saturday, and was it a Wednesday? A Wednesday night. I spent a lot of time, and we came to the conclusions that we're going to present tonight. We just all agreed and voted together. So I'm very happy to present this to you tonight. I'm going to go back. Oh, well, I won't go back to that slide. I do want to make a couple of comments. The First Selectman's opening remarks. We have 4 new members on our board this year, and 2 of us are returning. So it was a challenge to get through this budget. I do want to say that 2 years ago, we made a promise that we would revisit a couple of the things that we voted on that were pilots, and we did that in the budget this year. Right now, we're shaping Town Hall with our new town manager and embracing this town manager form of government. And tonight I'll present the staff that he emphasized he needed to be successful. Our board will emphasize efficient operations and a technology-focused customer service municipal government that continues to improve over the next few years. In these requests for staffing, we're going to have a stronger HR department and services to support our staff. We're enhancing services to customer-facing areas like the assessor, tax collector, and town clerk. We're maintaining all of our vehicles for all the departments, including PD and Board of Ed, to save on some outsourcing and the longer life of our vehicles. And we're hiring a PD records clerk that's needed to keep us compliant, and it's part of the recommendation of the CERTA study that actually recommended too. I just want to also point out that this tax increase, I don't take it lightly. I'm a retiree with a retired husband. We're both ex-professionals who plan on staying in Simsbury. And we're faced a $600 plus increase last year, and we're going to face over a $500 increase this year, just like everybody else. The other thing that we don't have this year is the ARPA funding that we had for the last 2 years. We received $7.5 million from the federal government, which I feel we use really wisely because we used it for capital projects, and we used it to do some projects that we maybe could not have afforded. When we did our Board of Selectmen goals, economic development came out as a top priority, and without the grand list, we will not have the revenue needed to curb tax increases. This is where residents will need to be willing to accept new businesses, creative housing, and other ideas, or else we'll all have to accept future tax increases. And then we have some key capital projects in here that I'll get to: the Flower Bridge, the Terrafil Pickleball Courts, the bike path, the East Coast Greenway, and the Performing Arts Center. And on that, I just also want to thank our town staff who've helped get us through all of this. Okay. Oh, I'm going backwards now. So these are just the Board of Selectmen goals. We have not finalized our goals, but these came out as the top goals, and we hope to get through this at our next Board of Selectmen meeting. And then again, this is just the budget calendar. We've been through all of those boxes, and we are now in the public hearing with a potential next public hearing, and then the budget referendum with a TBD date when everyone needs to get out and vote on the budget. A lot of this has been gone over by Lisa, so thank you, Lisa, because I don't have to go into detail on a lot of this. But the town operating budget was $28,103,721. We had a 2.93 tax increase, and the mill rate, I did not include the new fire district mill rate in mine, so our numbers are going to be a little bit off because I didn't have it at the time of this. But you can see the potential tax increase based on about a $390,000 home. And then again, I believe Lisa pointed out the budget drivers, the decrease in the motor vehicle, and then the fixed costs that we're facing. These are the revenue assumptions. Again, thank you, Lisa. The nominal grand list growth, the tax assumption rate, the money from the state government. And one of the things that we did not include in our budget, but I am going to refer to here, is we had intended to increase the amount of revenue in the investment interest line. So in some slides, I'm going to point to this $500,000 because it does make a difference, and we're hoping that it will be included when the Board of Finance does their final budget, which I'm pretty sure you guys will do, right? This just highlights you can see just the change in grand list growth, how it's dropped in the current year. From 2.45. The last few years we've had good grand list growth, and this year it's not so good. So these are the numbers that we saw before, also the $28 million, the 3.34 and the 2.93 total budget. Again, the tax increase based on a $390,000 home. And then this is the impact with that $500,000 increase in revenue added. And it does save it goes down to a $509 tax increase, again, not including the fire district. So I wanted to present some of the changes that we made in our Board of Selectmen budget discussion to the town manager's budget to get us close to, or really where the Board of Finance guidance was to get to a 3.5 budget. We did eliminate a position. This was a 2-year pilot that we funded with ARPA 2 years ago, and it wasn't working out the level that we expected. So we did actually go back and cut the position. Because again, it was using ARPA funds, and we didn't want to put it into the operating budget. The SVIA, we funded them last year with ARPA funding, and we are funding them again this year with a $200,000 amount, which originally was going to be in operating, but we've moved it to reserves. The reason we moved it to reserves is we don't know what the long-term budget operating impact is, so by putting it here, it enabled us to fund it, not hit the taxpayers with it, and we will be working on that to see what happens in the next couple of years. And then the vacancy rate got bumped up to reduce the $100,000. The contribution for Simsbury Farms, which was a pension amount, we're going to push that to year-end savings. And then Tom Roy was able to do some magic here, decrease paving without impacting resident safety, and also the salt for the winters. So we were able to cut those out. And then we did move something out of the CNR budget for the Iron Horse median, and it was a $60,000 CNR item, and instead we're included a $5,000 maintenance item. So we have a reduction to the original budget of $725,749, and then we're also going to increase the revenue investment income. A couple of notes here. We did all of our outside agencies. They remained flat except for places where we had to do the increase to meet requirements. We moved the chamber to a contingency account, and then potentially, we'll talk about that later, we're doing a change to the CNR payback, and that would add another $60,000. So these are the staffing changes that we approved. We actually took away 1 staff member and we added 4 staff positions. The town manager, Mark Nelson, responded that these are his needs for the foreseeable future. And so he made the case that these are needed for town hall, and we actually agreed with him. So the human resource department, in his view, he would like to restructure that department and, probably move up our HR coordinator to an HR director position, and then add a generalist so we provide better service to the town staff, for retirements and any of their HR needs, and to also physically move the office so people have a place that they can go that's a true HR department. The other position is a town hall administrative specialist. The assessor, town clerk, and tax collector have different cycles of needs throughout their years, and by hiring a floater kind of position, we will have somebody trained in all 3 departments. And I believe there used to be a person that did this, according to Colleen, who had a retirement party tonight. The mechanic driver is needed by Public Works. This was a need last year, and for this year, Tom is willing to fund it for half a year, but it will be a full year next year. And the police records clerk, this came out of the Certus study. We're a little behind on some of the record keeping. So in order to be compliant, we need to increase the staff in the records department. And there's a CNR request that goes along with this, which I'll get to. But the town hall staff did do salary research on these positions. Most of you know we're doing a comp and classification study looking at all the positions in town hall, and that is being incorporated into this. So it may seem like a little, we're doing this before we have the study, but it's kind of being meshed into this as it goes. And then our personnel subcommittee will also be part of reviewing the results of the study and also approving these job description changes. So that would be Heather, Steve, and I are on personnel subcommittee. So we're going to scrutinize this. And then there's some additional highlights I wanted to call out because we're going to get into the deeper slides. And these are just some of the bigger things that we discussed and put into the budget this year. We've been funding the Main Street Partnership. You know, it's the business organization that really encourages economic development in town. And we've bumped up the amount from $50,000 to $100,000 for this year. This was a recommendation from our town manager because he heard the need for us to focus on economic development. I mentioned the Simsbury Volunteer Ambulance funding. This is to fund that second ambulance that some of us have heard about and people have been hearing about for the last few years, to make sure that the staff from 7 to 7, that there are 2 ambulances on call. I mentioned that this was funded through capital reserves, and the last year it was funded through ARPA. We have the Simsbury Performing Arts Center. This is a capital project. Some things fell in line for this. We got a $900,000 grant from the State Bond Commission, and it's going to be a DECD project that the town will manage. We've approved $500,000 in our capital budget here, and we previously gave $350,000. So now it's going to be up to the Simsbury Performing Arts Center to fund the remaining $1 million to make the backstage happen for them. And then the Flower Bridge, we were all waiting for the Flower Bridge to happen. We funded it with ARPA last year on the $1.9 million. 2 years ago, we used ARPA to fund the evaluation and design of the Flower Bridge. And now, come to find out, we need another $500,000 to do the work. I think there was additional structural issues that were found when the evaluations were done. So that's another ask in this budget. And the park has been closed for this season in anticipation of this happening. The other project that ran into some difficulties is the Terrafil pickleball courts. If you remember, we funded that 2 years ago with ARPA money, and then we got caught up in the FEMA maps, that we were waiting for revised FEMA maps. It turns out that the old court is in a floodway where you cannot build or replace something there. The new FEMA maps, we are not in a floodway, so we're waiting for those to come out. And they're out, but they're not, I guess, fully approved. And there is an additional cost there. So rather than do a supplemental appropriation later, the way to best do it is to include it in the budget for any potential overages so that we can move forward. And then this is our CIP plan. I just don't want to talk too much. These are the projects for Public Works. A couple of these I'd like to highlight is the Terrafil Connection, the East Coast Greenway. Everybody knows about that project. We just completed that little piece from Bloomfield to Terrafil Center. Now the big thing that we want to do is go from Terrafil Center out to Hot Meadow Street and connect the Farmington Valley Heritage Trail to the East Coast Greenway and have a full connection for people to travel through that whole area. A lot of this will be grant funded, so that's a big plus there. The Drake Hill Flower Bridge, I already mentioned that. I think everyone's pretty familiar about where that is. Town Hall rooftop units, these are the HVAC units that are at the end of their useful life and need to be replaced, and that is also a Public Works project. We have as you know, we have the community farm, so there's some work that needs to be done on the barn out there, and we're trying to secure a new lease to have somebody take over, which I believe we're close to. So that needs to be done in order to make sure that that's a viable entity. And then the Stoddard Dam breach. This is the dam out on West Mountain. I think it's gone back and forth as to what we're going to do with that bridge, and I think at this point we're going to breach it, is the plan. So that is for that. And then to get into a couple of the Culture, Parks and Rec, the memorial pool design. So I'm sure people have heard about the splash pad. This is to fund basically doing an evaluation of the current bathhouse, beach house, whatever you call it. It has bathrooms in there, to look at the pool, to look at the bathhouse, to look at the sprinkler pool, and to evaluate it for putting in a splash pad, which is part of the 2020 Parks and Rec Open Space Master Plan. Right now, to replace the whole pool is a $2 to $3 million project. This is an option it would reduce staffing. It would eliminate the need for an ongoing lifeguard because there's no drowning risk is there? Reduced? Okay, no promises. it's a less need for multiple people working at this, and it would be a place for families to bring their kids and grandkids, for that matter. There are costs associated with if we just closed down Memorial. You could pave it over, but this is the best use that the Parks and Rec Commission and the Parks Director are endorsing. And then we have the band shell addition. We've all heard about the second act, and this is to help the PAC for attracting performers, to provide better space in the back end for the acts that come, because they currently have to rent trailers to house the Hartford stage. It will include permanent restrooms, storage room, green rooms, rehearsal, and community space. There will be some additional costs associated with keeping it open year-round, but that is the funding. Like I mentioned that before, but that is how the funding right now looks. And then for the Board of Ed, the projects are the district network infrastructure, it's technology, the amphitheater and auditorium improvements. I guess they're redoing the flooring and the seating in the amphitheater, the auditorium, the lighting, and the curtains need to be started, and Tooten Hills replace a roof. I'll get into this when I get to the end. We did make a cut here of the district flooring, but there's a proposal that I'll discuss after that about that. And so that's what I'm going to go through for the CIP. Let's just get to my CNR plan here. And then that just shows you where the funding is coming from. And then this is a list of the CNR. These are items that are under $250,000. The CIP plan is over $250,000. And there's a variety of smaller projects on here that, Town Hall is looking at doing upgrades for accessibility and compliance. Included in here is fixing the marble in Eno Hall because it's a historic building. I'm trying to find my little note here on this one. And then, let's see. For Parks and Rec, there's the $100,000 for the pickleball courts. The Apple Barn, I believe hasn't been replaced in a long time. It's leaking, and carpets need to be replaced, and it is rented out, and we do generate revenue, and it is used by multiple people. So that is one that's on here. As you know, you've seen the park sign entrance, the new signs that we have around town. We normally fund additions and enhancements and refurbishments to playscapes regularly. And then the library, we have some computer replacements, which hopefully will be grant funded by a PEG-PISA grant that was recently submitted. A couple things in the general government I want to point out. The finance department and the town manager have agreed to, we're going to take on ClearGov, which will really enhance transparency to the public on the budget. That it really creates a digital budget book, and it gives everyone an easy way to view the budget online, and to actually, once it's up there for a few years, you can drill down into the historical and see what's out there, and it'll also clarify how you look at and report on capital. And then the police, I mentioned we talked about a police records clerk as part of the Certus study. Well, to go along with that police records clerk, there's going to be a digitization effort of the records and also a revamping of the storage area to make sure that there's room for all of the storage and the staff that goes with it. The neighborhood planning, if you remember from ARPA, I think it was last year, we funded a charrette plan to do 3 years, a $50,000 a year plan to look at Terrafil. And then because the budget's in flux, like it keeps moving forward, so things are not stagnant. After our budget presentation to the Board of Finance, our finance director worked with the Board of Finance and the chair to make some recommendations to our board on how to handle debt service, which is one of the highest costs to our budget this year. And these were some of the recommended changes that I'm just showing here because since what you've seen here, it's going through some transition to get to here. There was a proposal to increase the CNR traditional payback. We're going back to what it was at 416, reducing it by the $300,000. And if you look at our budget, and all of our budget information is online, if you go to the town website under the finance section, you can see all of this and read it all. Everything that had been in that 300 is designated in a separate line item, and it'll also give us $60,000 back to our operating budget. The recommendation was to not bond for more than $10 million across 2-year periods. So because we had capacity and because the case was made for the district flooring, it was added back into the budget. We also had, during our budget, we wanted to use some of the capital reserves for some of the projects. We had funded the splash pad, the Flower Bridge, and the district infrastructure with pretty much cash from the reserves, but that is now reverted back to bonding in the next wave of our budget. And then we created a non-funded category for all the projects that do not fit into this budget, but we need to keep on our radar for the future. And then these are the next steps. We're here tonight. We'll be here again. Board of Finance will take the budget. Board of Selectmen will set the referendum date, do the mailer, and then we'll all vote for our budget. And that's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. We'll move on to the public audience part of our budgets, the way it will work. But for those who signed up, we'll start with those first, and then I'll ask if anyone wants to come up from the audience, and we'll take you as I see you. If you could please limit your comments to 3 minutes regarding the budget or finances. And then after everyone's spoken, if someone wants to speak again, they will have the opportunity to do so as well. I wanted to let folks know we're not going to respond to the questions as they come up, but after everyone is done, I will ask the superintendent and the town manager and their teams whether they want to respond to any of the questions that were raised during the public hearing. Our board will have the opportunity, if they hear something, to ask staff follow-up questions as well at that point. After that happens, we'll begin budget deliberations among the Board of Finance only, but all are welcome to stay for that process as well. And there may be questions our board asks to staff at that point as well, too. So with that, we'll begin with Deeg McKay. And then we're going to go to John Hurley, Chris Barnett, Jerry Lintner, Rachel Loveland, and David Bush, and then we'll get other folks.
Good evening. My name is Deej McKay. I live at 15 Woodside Circle, Simsbury, Connecticut, and I'm a board member of the Old Drake Hill Flower Bridge. I strongly support the restoration and repainting project for the Old Drake Hill Flower Bridge. It has been 30 years since this 1892 metal truss bridge was repainted. And you can see from these slides, these pictures, that the bridge's rust and corrosion needs to be repaired before it further deteriorates and becomes a safety issue. Now, the Old Drake Hill Flower Bridge, an adjoining Hartford Landing Park, is an icon in Simsbury, bringing visitors, tourists, bikers, kayakers. You need to move it? Sorry. Bringing visitors, tourists, bikers, kayakers, birders, flower enthusiasts, picnickers, photographers, and those seeking a place of respite. As we learned from the bridge tours we gave this past year, the handicap accessibility of the bridge, the park, and the picnic tables is very vital for creating a place where people of all ages and abilities feel comfortable. The beautiful flowers on the bridge and the park bring joy to everyone. I ask for your support for this project to save this icon, the Old Drake Hill Flower Bridge, for years to come. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. John Hurley? And then Chris Barnett, you're up afterwards.
Hi, my name is John Hurley. I moved to this community about 2.5 years ago out of New York. I was a fireman in the city, and I just want to let you know that it's one of the nicest communities I've seen around. I have a couple of questions, one being the Wagner, the old Wagner Ford building is that going to be moved ahead soon in the planning stages? And also, basically, that grant that was given to the sidewalks up by Big Y and everything, there is like a part of that doesn't seem to be, it seems to be a break in it there, all the way up to the DPW garage. I was just wondering, maybe if somebody could comment on that. Those two areas,
Thank
that's
you,
pretty
John.
much.
After Chris, we've got Jerry Lintner.
Chris Barnett, 15 Oxjoke. I don't know if I have to say that because I
I have your addresses
okay.
here, but when people who aren't on my list, if you could
So I
give
have
your
a
address.
visual as well. I'm speaking today as a board member of the Simsbury Meadows Performing Arts Center to ask for your support. I'm a longtime resident of Simsbury and work as a realtor in our community. I know firsthand the importance of Simsbury's unique and priceless amenities such as Simsbury Farms, the Performing Arts Center, the Flower Bridge, and our bike path. The one thing all of these special places have in common is their ability to attract people from outside of our community to visit our town and spend money at our local shops and restaurants. These amenities are something we as a community continue to be proud of, as they are some examples of the many reasons we continue to attract new homeowners and businesses to our town and are what contribute to the quality of life in town for our residents. The Performing Arts Center is a vibrant part of our community, and we offer entertainment throughout the season that attracts people from the greater Hartford area, Massachusetts, and New York. Our venue welcomes over 40,000 visitors each year to the town of Simsbury. We are a multi-generational, easily accessible venue which introduces Simsbury to many people from outside of our town. For 15 years, the venue has been waiting to be finished. The addition will provide the necessary space to become a venue that can attract more entertainment to our stage and be more attractive to our promoters. In addition, the public-facing bathrooms will be accessible to those who frequent Rotary Park, the bike path, and the dog park. We have never been this close to finishing what we started almost 20 years ago. Our unique public-private partnership has allowed our nonprofit to expand our offerings and bring more diverse programming to the stage. We are so close to this becoming a reality with a generous grant received from the state, the generous donors our nonprofit has commitments from, the reserves that the Simsbury Meadows Performing Arts Center has committed to this project, and with the outstanding help from the town. What a great way to kick off our 20th anniversary by starting our next act in the expansion.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Jerry, and then we'll go with Rachel Loveland. Jerry Lintner, and then Rachel Loveland. I don't have you on the list. Oh, I do have you on the list. Jan, yes. Yes, Jan. And then Jerry, why don't you go?
Jan Lintner. I'm the chair of the Old Drake Hill Flower Bridge. And I do want to thank the Board of Finance, the Board of Selectmen, for funding and following through on this project, which has been a long time coming. As Deej said, it's been 30 years since the Flower Bridge was renovated and painted, but we can't stop now. Thinking about some of the things as I've been investigating the budget, this project checks all of our boxes, the three important ones: improving public safety, which the renovation will do, maintaining current assets. The bridge is owned by the town of Simsbury, and we do the day-to-day maintenance and the flowers on the bridge, and spending money to save the money, to save in the long run, having a coating system on the bridge which is going to stop the deterioration and the rusting will save us all. So I'm asking you tonight to please keep this project, the dollars which had previously been approved and the supplemental dollars that we need to ask for now because of changes in market conditions, so that we can maintain this icon of Simsbury and complete its refurbishing and repainting. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Jerry? And Jerry and then Rachel.
Okay, tell me, I'm limited to 3 minutes?
You're limited to 3 minutes.
See what I can do. Actually, I don't expect to take that long. My name is Jerry Lindner. I'm at 12H Wiggins Farm Drive in Simsbury. And I just wanted to give a little more background on the bridge. Yeah, we are approaching 30 years old. The bridge was going to be torn down over 30 years ago, and Anita Mealer got a grant that allowed that historic structure to maintain. It actually then cost us less to do the improvements then than it would have to have it torn down. But in the 30 years, I mean, if you visit there, you have to see, too, the rust spots and all. And there were some structural damages that hadn't been anticipated. So what value is the old Drake Hill Flower Bridge? Well, first of all, if there isn't a bridge, there isn't a flower bridge. We have 66 volunteers, members. None of our people are paid. We have no staff that we pay. In the years that we've been here, we've had income of approaching $250,000. So we have not been in the past as an organization a burden to the town. The question is now, is an investment in the structure worth what we can give in return? Well, it's hard to measure the pleasure people get. But I will tell you, any volunteer that is on that bridge, one of the things they did not anticipate is strangers coming up to them, and they're from all over. They're from Europe, they're from bicycle groups, they're from former residents of Simsbury. And they say, oh, I read about this, I have to be here. Oh, this is wonderful. And they engage in conversations. They carry the result of that conversations on. And unless you aren't aware of this, we can't keep these in stock at the bridge. They keep getting pulled out of the container all the time. But this is our annual brochure. It lists all of the restaurants in Simsbury with a brief little summary of what they specialize in. And in talking to the restaurants, yes, they get people and they get the comments on how much the bridge means to them. So, all of you as residents, I want to thank you for all that you've done. I hope you enjoy it as much as we do, and we look forward to sustaining the effort if the bridge gets repaired. Oh, and by the way, that Jan Lindner, I am not her dad. I am her husband.
Thanks, Jerry.
So the boss, I'm going to give you this, and everybody has to sign they read it, okay?
Okay. Thanks, Jerry. Rachel? And then we'll go with Dave Bush.
Hi, my name is Rachel Loveland. I am a Simsbury parent, and I am just here to speak about the splash pad. We use Camp Stuff to Do, we use Memorial Park, and I just want to stress the importance of having something there for all kiddos, the camp kids and the young kids in town. So thank you.
Thank you,
On that
Rachel.
note, we're out of here. Enjoy your evening.
Good evening, David Bush, Chairman of Park and Rec. I can only imagine you could have got to guess what I'm going to talk about, but I've just been upstaged by the most cute little child that is promoting the same thing I'm promoting. First of all, I want to thank the Board of Finance, the Board of Selectmen, all of our financial folks. You folks clearly have put a ton of work into this budget. It's not an easy job. I'm here to ask for one thing. There's $150,000 for a splash pad. So then you sit here and you go, geez, why do we need a splash pad? Well, this is easy. This is not a want. This is a need. We have an aging pool that is simply costing the town money. We're throwing money away at that memorial pool. And the newest trend in aquatics is splash pads. They are less expensive to build. They are less expensive to operate. They are more efficient from an energy standpoint, and they bring people into the community. One of the things we're charged with, as I'm the chairman of Park and Rec, and we're charged with planning, just as you are charged with planning and budgeting. This has been in the 2020 master plan as a top priority, i.e. get rid of something that's costing you money and not being used well and replace it with something more dynamic. And we know it's more dynamic because we have our bordering communities, Canton, Avon, where they're all going from pools to splash pads in an effort to not only save money, but to deal with the needs of the community. Our master plan said we should do this. And then when we go to think about doing this, what a perfect spot. We have Memorial Pool, an area in the middle of town that is accessible so folks can go get an ice cream, they can go get a sandwich, they can be at the ballpark. And by the way, we're going to renovate bathrooms that can now be used by the folks using the baseball fields, in particular the upper fields. The other part of this is that Tom Taberski does a great job with our camps. The camp stuff to do has always had an aquatic component. If we remove the pool, which we really need to do, we need to replace that with a decent alternative, or an alternative that is now, again, the popular amenity. And that's what we have an opportunity to do here. This is simply $150,000 for the design review. The town knows that we can't do anything without somebody else telling us that it's the right way to build it, the right way to do it. So I simply ask, keep this funding in place. It is going to result in savings from a staffing standpoint, savings in a cost standpoint from the pool, and provide a wonderful new amenity for the town. Again, thank you for all your hard work.
Thanks, Dave. I'll now open it up to people in the audience. If folks can come up, if they could state their name and address, that would be helpful. Is there anyone from the audience? Joan?
Joan Coe, 26 Whitcomb Drive. I would like to give my point of view on long-term goals that will reduce the cost of education through regionalization, redistricting, and changing the configuration of the schools by increasing the quality of education. Core subjects have been hijacked with mandates that have placed an undue burden on the taxpayers and the educational system. The Board of Education has taken on the task of educating and parenting the students at an insurmountable cost. It is time to find creative ways to reduce costs. Special education has been one of the drivers of the budget, with the staff at each school delivering mental health and social services to meet the needs of the students. Special education should be managed by the state with satellite schools to deliver the needed services to the students with professional staff. Regionalizing special education would be cost effective. This model should be developed as a district with many schools participating with shared expenses from several towns partnering with the state for funding. Under this model, there would not be spikes in the budget with the delivery of special needs, as all expenses are shared in the districts. The Board of Education should be tasked with an effort to redistrict the schools in a cost-effective way to deliver the services needed to maintain high standards of learning. One of the ideas would be to move the 6th grade to Henry James Junior High. This move would reduce the student population in each school, allowing the reconfiguration of the primary schools. This can be done with redistricting. A doable project would be to save 2 schools for kindergarten through 2nd grade. 3rd grade through 5th grade would be housed in 2 schools, leaving the Terriffill School for many ancillary services as the school continues to be maintained as a shelter. During the transition, modular classrooms can be added if needed. The model of delivering educational services to a concentrated age group would allow the staff to develop programs specific to the needs of the students. The reconfiguration of the schools will save money with a large reduction in support services. The superintendent of schools in all districts should work together to develop a plan for cost-effective ways to deliver quality educational services, eliminating the burden of unfunded mandates. The budgets that will be forwarded to a referendum for a vote is up to the taxpayers to approve or vote no on the increases in the budget. Budgets have consequences. Since I've been speaking to the issue of the Board of Selectmen budget at public audience, at the Board of Selectmen meeting and the Board of Finance meeting, I will not be redundant in my comments and leave it up to the boards to assess my comments for reduction that I have already expressed. They are posted on Simsbury Patch and Twitter at Joan Co. And all of these comments will also be posted on Simsbury Patch and Twitter at Joan Co. Thank you for listening. And this is just long-term plans. We're not going to do this in a day, but it's just an idea to throw out.
Thanks, Joan. Is there anyone else who wants to speak? Linda? I do want to recognize Linda as a former member of the Board of Finance.
And state representative.
And state
many other
representatives.
awesome volunteer activities. Avid cyclist.
Thank you, and let me start by thanking all of the staff and the volunteers on these three boards who I know from personal experience work really, really hard on coming up with these budgets, and that this is a particularly tough year. I think my timing in retiring was really good.
Linda, just your address real quick.
Oh, sorry, 3 Ryan Circle. I'm not used to being on this side of the table. You know, it's a little intimidating coming up after everybody's been here to advocate all the spending and speak on behalf of the people who have to pay the tax bills. 6.5% budget increase. Thankfully, I wasn't on this board. You guys are probably really happy that I wasn't on this board because I would have driven you all nuts. It's just too high, and I know you're going to try to knock it down, but we've got to do better. Even 5% is way too high, and 6.5% is twice what the COLA is for Social Security and what the CPI is. And when you look at the wage indices for Connecticut, which I looked up, in the recent months, although it was like 4.3% for the last 12 months, that's been declining rapidly. In the most recent month of February and March, it was 0.1%. So you're talking about when this year comes along, as that trend continues, having a 5 to 6.5% increase when people's wages are going up 1.2%. I mean, that's really going to be a big problem. Not for me. I can afford this. I'm retired and I have good savings, lucky for me. But for young families and for other seniors, for people who are low income and don't have the kind of wage increase or the money to see these huge budget changes, it's a lot. And I worry about the impact on the competitiveness of our town, which Lisa alluded to, that when you have taxes that go up more and put you higher than your local other competing towns, and yes, we do compete for residents, then your property taxes go down. People leave. It becomes a downhill spiral, and it's something to keep in mind. Right now, we're enjoying great improvements in property values because of the COVID bump. That's not going to last forever. I was just reading an article today about demographic trends and how young people are not buying houses, they're not marrying as much, they're not having children as much. These trends are going to come home to roost, and this article was all about declining property values and the impact that it will have on towns. So I urge you to look hard, not just at the kinds of things that the Board of Finance can usually do, you know, moving things around to other years and refinancing, but we've got to get a control on how much that we're spending. 10 new positions that I heard about. 10 new positions in a year when we have significant increase in taxes is a concern. Splash pad, yes, wonderful idea. Is it necessary? Is it needed? Is it urgent? Can we push that off until a year when there's a little more money? We have a kiddie pool I'm going to wrap up at Simsbury Farms. I think we just have to make some tough decisions between, what's needed, what's urgent, versus what's nice to have. Thank you very much, and thank you again for everything that all of you do. I know it's really hard work.
Thanks, Linda. Is there anyone else in the audience? We've got Dave Ryan. Dave, were you on the Board of Finance at one point?
Never.
Never.
Were you on every other board? Pretty much.
I'm a spender, not a saver. And I'm encouraging you to support the Performing Arts Center project. It's
Dave, your address real quick.
Dave Ryan, 20 West Ledge in West Simsbury. Thank you, sorry. As chairman of zoning, that's all I would say. Come on. Where are you from? Anyway, that's me. Anyway, please support this. The quality of life in Simsbury is really, really dependent upon that facility down there. It's a big augmenter to our community's attractiveness to other people. And when you see the 4th of July concert down there with 8 or 10,000 people, it's the envy of the whole Farmington Valley, in fact, all of Connecticut. And that expansion is something that was intended in the first place and didn't get funded until now, we hope. And it's the key to keeping the Talcott Mountain Music Festival in Simsbury. So please support it.
Thanks, Dave. Is there anyone else from the audience who would like to speak? Come on up.
Greetings and thank you everyone here and all of your service. My name is Cynthia Flanagan from 18 Hayes Road. I speak on behalf of my 2 boys that grew up in the Simsbury schools and now have very successful careers. One's in the Coast Guard, one's in Army, and my youngest in the Army got engaged on the Flower Bridge. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else from public audience who would like to speak? I'll ask one last time. Is there anyone else from public audience who would like to speak? Okay, with that, we'll close the portion of the meeting. You have a second one? Yeah, wait, I do have someone who wants to speak. Yes, Linda.
I forgot to say one thing, and that is we really need a better communication plan to the public. The one article I saw about the budget didn't indicate that it was a 6.5% increase. And people don't know these things if they don't see them. I really would urge you to find a way, and this is something I've said for years, and there's always been reasons, but again, urge you to look for a way to communicate with people about what the impact is on their personal finances, because that's not clear, and people, you want them to know beforehand, not afterwards when they're really mad at you.
Thanks, Linda. Okay, with that, I will start with Matt Curtis. Is there anything that you heard and that you'd like to address or speak to before we proceed?
Not specifically. I mean, there were some thematic things there certainly that we have discussed, special education long-term. I had talked about in our presentation, superintendents and Board of Ed's #1 legislative priority is to continue to work through the mechanisms at the state level for what they call excess cost reimbursement. It's a system that's broken. It's not fully funded. The legislation will certainly help. I think there are other programmatic things we can look at internally that we'll have underway in the next year or so of planning to discuss.
Thank you. Mark, is there anything you heard that you'd like to comment on?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just first of all, as your new town manager, I wanted to take 30 seconds and thank everybody. First of all, our budget team, our Board of Selectmen, and not least of all the Board of Finance, because the Board of Finance came back to us during this process, gave us some guidance, set up the goalposts, and essentially said we've got to work together to get this down. My staff and the team did that. On the town side, we are under COLA at about 2.93. On the town side, we are at a number that we believe should earn the full support It was unanimous at the Board of Selectmen. We hope for unanimous support here. I will just say that with respect to the 4 positions that we've added, and as the first select person said, we did cut a position, but we had to add 4 others. One is only funded for half this year. It'll be full next year, but that's in our important Department of Public Works. We are desperately in need of upgrading our human resource capacity. It is important that amidst all of the fine comments we've heard tonight about the projects, the Flower Bridge was in the town manager budget on day 1. The Performing Arts Center was in my proposed budget on day 2. All of those things are great, but in our house at Town Hall, we have some leaks. And we need to do something with HR for all of our town employees, and some of the other things that we've put in this budget, frankly, should have been done when we had $7 million worth of ARPA money. Certainly on the splash pad, I would just make a pitch for that. I wish the $150,000 had been done out of ARPA, because it's one of those things that you might not want to do when you have a tough budget like this. But I would just urge everybody to remember that if you cut the splash pad this year, it probably will never happen. So when people say, well, let's push it out a year, my experience in public service is that when you push things out a year, it becomes 2 years, 3 years, and 5 years. And so I urge support for the splash pad. Thank you.
I'll open it up to members of our board. We've heard from members of the public. Is there anything that was said during public audience that you would like to ask follow-up of staff while they're present?
I just want to confirm that Mrs. Flanagan was in support of the Flower Bridge. I wasn't 100% clear, and thank you for your son's service in the Coast Guard and the Army.
Anyone else? Okay. So we'll then move on to the budget deliberations. You've heard reference to financing mechanisms the Board of Finance is exploring with the great help of Amy Merriweather and Melissa Appleby. We're going to have her walk us through what the Board of Finance has sort of settled on in concept. We have not taken a vote, but so to get public on the same page. One of the key expense drivers this year is debt service, which is over $1 million. So we are looking at ways to reduce that through the timing of the debt that we issue and also the use of reserves in the out years. The Board of Finance set as a goal for the Director of Finance to find solutions not just for this year, but for the out years, because the out year debt service was too high, and that meant budget increases were going to be too high. We asked her to do this 2 ways: do it in compliance with current town policies and under no circumstances to risk our AAA bond rating. So within those parameters, I do want to thank Amy for the effort she did on that, and I want to thank this board. We had some really good, difficult conversations around that, very thoughtful, and I want to thank everyone for their work on that. For people who don't follow the Board of Finance, it's deep in the numbers, so if you're interested in that kind of thing, it's interesting. If you're not, you kind of glaze over. Okay, Amy, why don't you tell us sort of what we talked through and sort of where we landed and how that might change where we are today and how it might change the out years. I'm sorry?
Did you want to start with the debt, or did you want to start with like the overall levy calc?
Overall levy calc.
Okay. Is that one not working? Okay. So last time we met, I'm just going to put this back to where the last time you saw it. So we did not have the increase for the fire district, and then we had, all right. So the tentative changes from the Board of Finance, there were a couple things. We have the SVAA contribution, which was taken out utilizing reserves. Since it's more of an operating expenditure, we actually put that back in the budget, but you can see down here that we increased our revenues for the $200,000 as well as a contribution in from the Capital Reserve Fund. There was a slight oversight in the budget with the library. They had a book bank program that was approved last year utilizing the ARPA money, so we put aside 3 years. This is year 2 of that project. So we increased the expenditures $4,000, and again, a transfer in from the capital reserve fund where the ARPA funding was stored in order to fund that. The Board of Finance expressed reducing the CNR payback for the $60,000 related to the $300,000 reduction in CNR that was mentioned earlier. So we are not going to utilize the CNR payback method. We are going to take that from reserves. So therefore, it's a reduction to the operating budget of that $60,000. I will skip this one for now. On to the revenue changes. If we add $500,000 to the investment income, again, that's what the first select woman mentioned earlier. That does have an impact to the budget. And then lastly, our reduction in debt service. If we move off our fiscal year 24 issuance for our second tranche of the Latimer Lane project, we would typically do that in spring of 2024. If we move it to summer of 2024, we could see a savings of about $866,000. So with all of those numbers combined, we had a tentative number of a budget increase of 4.9%. A couple of changes to this. So one that Lisa had mentioned earlier, the fire district is coming in at a mill rate of 1.05. So this unfortunately brings our tax increase to about 5.06%. And then the other thing that happened is 2 years ago, we had an agreement with our fire district where when the state capped the motor vehicle rate at 32.46, essentially, we cannot exceed 32.46 between the town and the fire district. So if our mill rate alone is 32.38 and we take that funding for the motor vehicle, it only leaves a very small amount for the fire district. So we made an agreement with the fire district when the state created this cap that we would proportionally give them their share of the motor vehicle tax based on the mill rate. So if their mill rate is 1.05, we essentially have 96% of the mill rate. They have 3% of the mill rate. If we allocate the motor vehicle dollars that way, the fire district gets 280,000 of that, and we get 8.6 million instead of 8.8 million. So then that increases our taxes further to 5.34, because then we have to increase the funding needed to offset that $280,000 funding that's going to the fire district. That's where we're at.
So why don't you then walk us through the out years on debt service? Because these are changes for this year, but we're also looking to use reserves in out years to pay for some of the future debt service. And what that means is, one, it will help with taxes, but two, there is less money available for capital projects. And we heard a lot about desired and wanted capital projects. So Amy will walk us through what that looks like.
So this top line is our debt service without any changes to our capital plan, and without any changes to when we're issuing our debt. So
Amy, before you even go from there, the increase next year is about 1.3 million. So that would already, we'd be looking at a huge tax increase next year if we didn't do something about that. So our board wanted to be proactive there. And if you look on the future, that goes down and then it goes up, up, up again. So we're trying to get that down because that will impact the mill rate.
Yep. So you can see here, this is without any changes to any capital plans. This is without any changes to any timing of any issuances. This is straight projections from the current plan that we have in the out years, doing everything the way that we normally do it. So 8.9 and 25, and then you have a big spike to 10 million. You're still around that 10 million, 10 million, 10 million. And you can see this year alone, which Lisa just said, it goes up 1.1 million, it goes up another 1.2 million. We skip an issuance, we go down a little bit, but then we're right back up a $500,000. So what we did is take a look at different options on how we can kind of, not feather in, how we can maintain a level of debt service where it is a smaller impact to the budget overall. You can see up here we have a 14% increase, 14%, 3%, negative 3%, and then almost another 5% drop. So how do we make that so that it's not making our taxes go significantly up and down year over year? So one of the options that the Board of Finance had reviewed is having our debt service go into the summer for an issuance as opposed to the spring. So this puts off some of your debt service payments, so then it's restructured for fiscal year 25, where we only have a $290,000 impact, I believe, for this next issuance. And then in the out years, you're essentially pushing off the debt service that you're missing in fiscal year 25 into the out years. So some of the things that we looked at and some of the things that we did, like I said, we're moving out that bond issuance, so we are capturing that savings for fiscal year 25. We also looked at the CIP plan overall for the next 5 years, and the Board of Finance had the boards go back and limit their capital spending for bonding to $10 million over 2 years, starting in fiscal year 26. So for example, 24, 25, our debt service cannot exceed 10 million, 26, 27, our debt service cannot exceed 10 million, and so on. Another thing that we looked at is utilization of a bond premium. So this is not something that we typically do in Simsbury. We typically decide not to take the bond premium. When we issue bonds, we're paying at, say, 4%, but our true interest cost is 3%. So we get a premium back for that money, basically upfront in cash, to pay the difference in the interest rate. We typically reduce our bonding, but there is an option where you can take a bond premium. So included in this option is to take that bond premium. So we'll get the bond premium in fiscal year 25, but then we won't use it until fiscal year 26. In addition to that, we have reserves, $300,000 for fiscal year 26, $700,000 for fiscal year 27, and $300,000 for fiscal year 28. So this is an attempt to smooth out the spikes in the debt service year over year. So we're essentially reducing our debt service by 1.3 in fiscal year 26. We're reducing our debt service another $700,000 in 27, and then in 28. By the time we get to 29, our debt service is in line with what we've already been budgeting, because we slowly build up to that level, and we no longer have to utilize reserves to maintain the level of debt service and funding each year. So you can see in this highlighted line the impact of doing those changes I just talked you through. So in fiscal year 25, it's an $866,000 savings. In fiscal year 26, almost $2 million, 1.3, 1.4, and about 1.1, just by making those tweaks to the capital plan and utilizing reserves for a few years. So then we get down to our capital reserves, and where does this leave us as far as a reserve level? So right now we're starting, or we're assuming that we're going to end the year with $3.8 million in our capital reserve. The projects that were discussed for tonight via the CIP, we planned using $500,000 of capital reserve. Our CNR $650,000. The ambulance, the SVEA that we just talked about, $200,000. There's a planned use of additional reserves to fund additional CNR projects for $1 million.
Amy, can you just highlight what that is for the public?
So on the Board of Education side, we are utilizing $700,000, a portion of it for buses and a portion of it for painting and elevator maintenance. And then on the town side, I'm not sure the projects offhand, the $300,000. Do you happen to know? It's okay, never mind. It's it's a collaboration of different projects. This is just to give us our CNR a bump on the town side and the Board of Ed side for 1 year to start catching up on some of those projects that we've fallen behind on.
And just, Amy, for members of the public, where did capital reserves come from?
So our capital reserves are generated from our year-end savings. So typically we are under budget on expenditures and over budget on revenues, and we take that money at the end of the year and we sweep it out and add to our capital reserves.
So for members of the public, some people think, oh, that's extra money, it's an overtax. It is not. That is how we fund capital. If we didn't do that, that money wouldn't be here and you could not do capital projects. You'd have to budget for it. Municipalities across the country do it this way. It's one way to budget capital. Part of the reason municipalities do it this way is it serves not only as a funding source for capital in the ensuing year, but it also ensures we don't end the year in a deficit. throughout the year, I'm sure you've seen, you budget, oh, we're going to get this amount in building permits. Oh, the state's going to give us this amount, and then surprise, that money doesn't show up. You don't want to be in a position when you end the year in deficit. The reason for that is, one, it's bad, but two, you can get a ratings degradation. Rating degradations are bad because that means you're going to pay more for borrowing in the future. So that's why we do it that way. It is not an overtax. It is a funding mechanism for capital, and it prevents us from ending the year in a deficit. Okay.
Lisa, maybe just to add to that, though, and correct me if I'm wrong, we should also think, though, that the mill rate does support the reserves that we're talking about here, though, ultimately, right? So it does allow you to take it out of the costing for a particular year, but it doesn't change the long-term need to replenish those reserves. So we should just think about that, I think, over time as well.
That's exactly right.
So we have the additional to the reserves of the bond premium, like we mentioned up here. We will get a bond premium from our next issuance. We will not use it in fiscal year 25. We will use it in fiscal year 26. So it will go into our capital reserve fund for future use. And then the assigned reserves for debt service is 2.3 million, and that ties back up here. The use of reserves overall is going to be 1.3 million from actual reserves, and then the $1 million of the bond premium that we are assigning that are not available for use.
And Amy, can you talk about line 27?
Yep, just kidding. On fiscal year 24 year-end contribution, so this is per our last quarterly review where we think we're going to land as far as year-end savings. Right now we have a lot of investment income. We've had a lot of additional state funding where we are going to be well over budget in our revenues and under budget in our expenditures due to staffing vacancies. So we anticipate about a $2.2 million surplus as of right now in the general fund that can be transferred out into the capital reserve fund at the end of fiscal year 24. So then the anticipated reserves would be about 2.3 million before any other transfers. So remember, Lisa and I just spoke about how we fund our capital, the year-end savings each year. So in fiscal year 25, it's anticipated we'll have another year-end contribution, fiscal year 26, 27, et cetera. So even though we're utilizing these reserves in this year, there's a more than likely chance that we'll be replenishing those reserves as well, and our reserves will exceed that almost 2.4 estimated balance.
So one of the reasons we are not taking final budget motions tonight is we are waiting for the next quarterly report. And as you can see, we use the quarterly reports to project what year-end is going to look like. We will get our next update on that for the April 16th, and we'll have a better idea of what year-end contribution will look like. They get firmer as we get closer to year-end. Year-end for the town of Simsbury is June 30th, and we close the books usually in October. That's when it becomes certified, when it's actually real.
A question for you guys as the new person here. So if you show those numbers again that you had up, Amy, please. It looks to me like we're basically using almost the entire capital reserve and then we're replenishing it. Is that something that we've typically done, or are we pushing the envelope, would you say, more than we've typically done? Right, because if I do the math, we would end up with about 170,000. If we didn't get that contribution at the end.
So we've never really assigned reserves to this level for future use. And up until about a few years ago, we never even had a capital reserve. So essentially all of this is new. But given the fact that the fiscal year 24 year-end results, I think are going to end up being in excess of $3 million, me personally is super comfortable with this reserve level at this point.
Yeah, and I wasn't trying to get at the comfort. I just wanted to sort of point out how the numbers were.
Right.
We're really going through the entire reserve just about with this, in sort of, because I think this is where the conversation is going to go. We're pushing the envelope.
Right.
Right.
So our board did, just to remind the public, our board did advise in December to leave capital reserves of 500,000, and the reason why we gave that guidance is because sometimes emergencies do come up. We had a dam failure at one point that those needs to get tapped for, so we did ask for that. But as Amy said, we are projecting a good year-end close, so there may be sufficient general fund reserves should an emergency hit. But you will see, because of that, our assigned reserves for debt service, we will do that assignment in October. We can't do that now because there are not enough dollars in there to do that assignment at this point. That's exactly right. Are there any other questions on sort of what Amy has proposed from members of our board Is there any questions about that? We reviewed this for about 2.5 hours in the engineer room, so our questions have been pretty thoroughly answered, but I just wanted to see if there's any further questions on this at this point.
One other quick one, Amy. I'll be the annoying one over here.
That's okay.
Could you just quickly translate the 0.34%, because we were at 5.34% now, right?
Yes.
Could we translate that into dollars?
Yeah.
If we wanted, I'm sorry, and I'll finish if we wanted to get to 5, what is the 0.34 worth in terms of dollars? My math tells me it's about 400 or 450,000. Never trust my math, though.
You're a little high.
Maybe it's a little high, all right. Good, I'm glad I'm a little high.
It is about 350,000.
Okay, thank you.
So we did ask Amy to evaluate. It was important for our board in terms of giving guidance. Our board expressed a very strong opinion that we should come in below 5%. Obviously, our first guidance was to come in below COLA. We did hear from the superintendent of schools and the town manager that they felt further reductions to get us to a 3.2% tax increase would not be in the public welfare. Upon hearing that, we did go back and ask them to make cuts and cuts again. And then we landed at our board with the general consensus that we wanted to come in under 5%. So I did ask Amy to go through, and she did actually, without my asking, on her own initiative, so thank you for that, coming up with scenarios on how to get us to our target number, given that we had some surprising news, no one's fault, but numbers came in higher than we were anticipating, and some of those numbers came in just this morning. So if you could walk us through that, Amy.
All right, so I'm gonna use my cheat sheet. So as you can see down here, the car taxes at 32.46, which is the cap, we would get 8.8 million. If we utilize the mill rate that we came up with, we would get 9.1 million. So essentially that's $290,000 that we are short, that the state should be reimbursing us. The state reimburses us 1 year in arrears, so we will get that reimbursement back next year. So one of the things that we can do without creating a cliff is use $250,000 of our general fund reserves to reduce the mill rate. So if I put in that 250,000, that gets us down to about 5.09%. On the Board of Education side for our tuition revenue, we're typically pretty conservative on this number, but over the last 2 years and including this year, we will have about $200,000 in tuition revenue. So I'm comfortable increasing that to $75,000 or by $75,000. And
where was it before you increased it?
I think it was about 125,000, something like that, or 122. And then the last thing we can do, we can look at the investment income. We can increase it by $50,000, knowing that we have a cushion there in the collection rate. And $50,000 doesn't have a huge impact on the budget. So with all of those changes, we can get down to a 4.97% tax increase.
Amy, at our last meeting, you were going to update us on where we were with the investment income, what assumption you're using on returns that you anticipate we will have.
Yeah. So I ran some of the cash flow numbers, and based on our average cash flow, the investment return currently at the 1.8 million hovers, give or take, around 4%. Anywhere from like 3.6% to a little over 4%, depending on where our cash flow is during the year.
And can you talk about why we're at that number? I know some other institutions have 4, and some up to our fiducian thought we could maybe hit 5.1. And do we have any options to put that money in vehicles that would be acceptable to the state law that could generate a higher investment income?
So yes, we can look into that. for the project done for Latimer is done in December. I would be hesitant to move that into any investments until Latimer is done, just because we need the cash flow to pay the multi-million dollars of money going out the door. Post Latimer, when all of those payments are made, yes, we have sufficient reserves where we could probably put money into a CD or explore some alternative investment options. I checked with fellow finance directors around the state. Most of them use STIF, money market. But again, something that we can reach out to, perhaps JP Morgan or Morgan Stanley or.
Not to put Art Wallace on the spot, but he did offer to help with that.
Absolutely.
So thank you for that. All right, so that's one option we have. I'm interested in getting board members' feedback on one, where we are, two, Amy's options, three, if there are any other options the board would like us to consider.
Can you just move the screen up so we can see it? Yeah, thanks.
Amy, if you were to characterize, by the way, thanks for all your work on this. I should have started with that. If you were to characterize the places where we're using reserves right now, like to me, that just feels dangerous if it's recurring, right? And so like to your point on moving a situation where we know we're going to get a bump from the reimbursement from the state, that seems like that's perhaps safe because you're going to get paid back the next year.
Right.
Are there any places that you're looking at this and you're saying, well, that's something we're going to have to make up next year because the reserve won't be there? Or do you feel like we're really putting one-timers like that or things that have a pattern that it makes sense to put it in the reserve? Because the reserve saving us feels a little dangerous.
Yeah, so the reserves that we're utilizing in a way that we're not depleting our reserves. So the comfort level with the capital reserves being at that 2 million, less any other transfers in, like that's a comfortable place to be. We still have plenty of money to utilize for any emergencies that happen. We're not usually utilizing any reserves for the general fund. However, we are creating a cliff with the half-year position. So that's something that we know we're going to have to bake in for next year.
For which one, Amy?
The half-year position, the mechanic. And aside from that, I don't think there's anything I can think of.
Amy, health reserves? Health reserves, we're using more than recommended by our consultant.
So our health insurance reserve is very healthy. So we utilize that as an opportunity to pay down our health insurance in the operating fund between the Board of Education and the town. We do have a plan to mitigate that in the prior years. So we're essentially using our general fund reserves to assign that at the end of the year, if you will, or during the budget process, so that we have a way to feather that in over time, so that we don't have to take that full $850,000 hit all at once. One of the things that we will try to do with that, especially on the Board of Education side, because that's the majority of the reserves for health insurance being utilized at $650, is we are already in discussions at looking at our special education, ways that we can try to get that down, hoping that there are ways that we can utilize reductions in those figures so that we don't have to use the reserve set aside for the health insurance. So even though we're utilizing reserves, we have our backup plan so it doesn't hurt us financially. And there's nothing in here that would be frowned upon by the rating agency.
There's one other use of reserves, and that would be the payback to Culture Parks and Rec at year-end close.
So that's a one-time thing that also doesn't create a cliff. That was an error in the prior year when we had Milliman look at our pension. Since we have 3 different funds that fund salaries, we have our Culture Parks and Rec, we have our WPCA, and we have our general fund. We had Milliman break out the pension cost in between the 3 funds, but we have some parks members that are charged to general fund, and then we have some parks members that are charged to the Simsbury Farms Fund. Some of the employees were erroneously moved into the Simsbury Farms Fund, so they essentially overpaid their pension contribution. So we're going to use a one-time reserves of $200,000 to pay them back.
So the only thing that is a little bit of concern to me is the use of health reserves. Our consultant did recommend we use no more than 1/3 of health reserves so that you don't create a cliff. It is true we will be using general fund reserves to mitigate that cliff, but that money is now not available for capital or other uses, so it's an opportunity cost. And that, the reason why they recommend that is because it actually, having lived through it one time, we used more reserves than was recommended, and the next year we had an 18% increase in health costs. So the idea there was to mitigate that. Can you talk about a worst-case scenario? So worst-case scenario, we have to utilize that whole amount and healthcare goes up. What could that situation look like?
So we wouldn't have to use the whole amount. We would have to feather in some of it into the operating budget. So we would have to, take a, I don't know, say we take $200,000 that we have to commit to increasing the Board of Education budget, for example, and then we use the rest of the reserves to fill in that gap. And then the next year we increase another $200,000. And then again, we feather it in so that there is no impact. If the fund increases again, on top of that, on top of what we already did for the 650, we have to commit to keeping those rates stable and not utilizing any additional reserves.
What do we project for normal healthcare increases not using reserves?
This year it was 1.7%.
Is that typical?
There is no typical. We've been at 1%, 3%, 4%, 9%, and 12%. In the
One
time
year,
I've been
18.
here. So,
Okay. I just want to make sure everyone's comfortable with that, because that is a deviation from the guidance we gave. It is a deviation from what our consultant recommends. The reason why the consultant recommended that was the creation of a cliff that could impact the operating budget. Amy's solution to that was, well, let's take care of the cliff. But that does involve using general fund reserves, and as I think Art, when we were talking earlier, that's an opportunity cost that is lost to be used for elsewhere. But given that the tax increases were projected to be so high, it seems like a prudent use at this point. But I did want to make sure everyone, members of the public, are aware that that is what's happening, because it is a little bit unusual. Are there other questions?
I was just going to ask, as you referred to like some of the updated numbers we'll get at some point, and I know it's a hard question to answer, but what's the plus or minus on this? Because like, let's say we said yes to all of this and it gets us to 497, which is to me right on the edge of what I think is reasonable. Like, what's the plus or minus? Like, could this thing easily move by another 0.2, 0.4? Do we have?
no.
No, it can't?
I don't, like lower?
No. I guess in either direction, to be honest with you, but.
When we see the quarterly, last year when we saw the quarterly, we found an adjustment we need to make. So that's part of the reasons we look at the quarterly.
Oh, the quarterly for the year-end savings estimate?
Yeah.
I guess where I'm really going is like, should we be shooting for 4.8? Because that's a good way to make sure we get to 5. Like, do you think we're plus or minus 0.2%, given where the rest of this could shake out, or?
I'm not sure I understand your question. For 25?
Yeah. And I guess I'm going off of, Lisa, what you were saying, that we still have to see final.
The quarterly projections.
So that impacts your capital reserve, though. That won't impact your fiscal year 25 operating.
Okay.
So it might, if we have to do a revenue adjustment. Last year, we had to do a revenue adjustment that impacted the mill rate. We're not
for the motor vehicle.
Right. We're not anticipating.
No, nothing has come to our attention this year that's going to have that impact.
But we'll just run the numbers to make sure.
Okay.
And there are still strange things that can happen in the Capitol. So we'll watch that. I'm hoping the strange things that happen at the Capitol are more positive than negative. But we will be watching that with some interest. All right, just sort of a summary of where we are. One of the things we'll be proposing, and I want to thank Melissa for working on some of those motions. And then before we continue on, then we'll go on to the CIP revisions and the CNR revisions. But $500,000 addition to revenue for interest income investment dollars. We'll be reducing the CNR payback line by $60,000 in the Board of Selectmen budget, but using capital reserves of $300,000 to fund those projects. We'll be reducing the debt service line by $866,643, and we will do that by delaying the issuance of Latimer Lane until July or August. We'll do the minor library adjustment, no cost to taxpayers. Those dollars were put aside as part of ARPA for 3 years. We will transfer, use reserves to fund the Simsbury Volunteer Ambulance Association for the current year. That will have to go into the operating budget at some point. One option we will have is to assign some additional dollars in either the general fund or the capital reserves fund to feather that in over 2 years. That will be a motion we'll be considering. We're going to need to approve the use of an additional $1 million from capital reserves, the $300,000 for the Board of Selectmen and the $700,000 for the Board of Education in lieu of the increase in the CNR payback. We're going to have to amend the capital improvement plan as recommended by the Board of Selectmen and reflected in the documents we received earlier today, which we'll go over in a second. We'll also have to amend the CNR project list, which has been updated, so we'll have to vote on those dollars as well. We're going to have to assign dollars from the general fund reserves of about $205,749 to fund the error in calculations on benefits for Parks and Rec. That will be done in October. And then we're going to have to make a motion to transfer the bond premium upon receipt from the second Latimer debt issuance to the capital reserve fund, and that will then become an assignment that we will make in October. So that's going to happen. You'll see in our motions this year for the Board of Selectmen, we're going to identify what town departments are. We haven't done that in the past, but the reason why it's important is transfers between departments need to be approved by the Board of Selectmen. Transfers within a department are approved by the Board of Selectmen. So any transfers within Public Works, they want to exceed salt and decrease road pavement, has to be approved by the Board of Selectmen. But within do not. So solid. Oh, yes. Within the department, it has to be approved by the Board of Selectmen. Between departments, it's us. We do approve the line item, though, and the line items still need to be approved by us, and those will be attached to the document. Melissa gave us a nice summary a couple of weeks ago, and we'll just attach those to the document so that we'll see that. But that's why it's important.
So what was the 205 plus?
So last year, our actuary made a miscalculation and it attributed the costs of benefits to one of the workers in the Simsbury Farms Special Revenue Fund to the Simsbury Farms Special Revenue Fund, when in fact it was a split position, and some of those dollars should have been attributed to the general fund, Simsbury Park. So it was an error by the actuary, is that fair to say? And how it was calculated. So this will be a replenishment of that.
Should that be here? I guess we got this list of 1,000 numbers, and then we got this list, and I'm trying to like reconcile what's what. Should that be on here?
Well, so no, it's not on there because this is what's for the budget, but it's true. I think it would be helpful to see the list of all the things we're going to do, but it does not, because that is going to be done at year end in October with general fund reserves when we close the books.
I mean, it would be helpful for me to kind of see a before step, and where we are, and then even if there's October stuff that doesn't impact, because to anybody who's listening, watching, you got to put all these together and see what impacts what, because I've been knee deep in this and the journey is hard.
The journey is hard. I mean, I will say, Melissa, and it's not done yet, but she is working on motions, and the motions do lay out all these steps, but I think a graph ahead of time would be helpful, and I think we have the makings of that, so is that something?
All the pieces are there, it just, it helps me to see the progression of the numbers, where we started. I don't think we need to go all the way back from like day one and what changes people have made, but it would be nice to see kind of the motion that we've made and what we've collectively, all three have done to kind of, from a starting point to where we are, just to understand how much we've
What we've changed.
changed, yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
I mean, that would help me. I don't know if,
No, it helped the public too. I think that's a great idea. Thank you for that. One of the things, I will say, I've been doing this 15 years, this is going to be the most complicated motions we'll be making. There are a lot of changes being made. Some of them are going to be made now. Some of the assignments will be done in October. They're all different moving pieces to get us to where we need to be. It is extremely complicated. I think Melissa's just done a great job with the motions, and when you see them, the packet is going to be like probably 60 pages long, so you're going to need time to read it. It does involve working with bond counsel, and which is no easy task, and the language is super complicated. So it will require all eyes on it because there are so many changes. There is a high likelihood we will miss something even with everyone's eyes on it. So
I interrupted you and I apologize for that, but there was one other thing that we talked about previously where we were using reserves to offset some debt service, and that was going to be over multiple years. I didn't see that here either.
it's up there. Amy, can you pull that up?
Was there, because to Art's point earlier, if we don't replenish the reserves all the way, we've already kind of.
Yes, it's a risk.
Some of that, so that.
It's an absolute risk.
Okay.
All those blue numbers.
Use of reserves and bond premium, you'll see they start in year 2026. We say bond premium, but the bond premium is going to be in reserves, so it's essentially the reserves. We're going to get the bond premium in July. We're going to make a motion to transfer it to reserves. We're going to spend it in 2026, 1.3 million of reserves to get that debt service number down. That debt service number goes from 10 million to 8 million to.
That's different from what we had originally talked about, I think.
No, I think that's,
Well, I'm looking.
oh, that's been updated. I had that wrong. You
Okay.
have from me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. I was looking for the extra 700.
Yes.
Okay.
So we did not need the extra 700 in year 2025 because the bond premium, just delaying of the issuance takes care of the 800. That was the error that I had.
Okay.
So when you see there, you'll see 2025 to take care, this is just for debt service. We're going to use capital reserves for other things in the budget, but for debt service, we're not using any. Next year, we're going to use 1.3 million capital reserves. Then we're going to use 7 million. Then we're going to use 700,000, then 300,000. But that's $2.3 million. That's a capital project that will not get done because we're doing this. So that is one of the risks. So now if we could go through the CIP that was approved by Mark and the Board of Selectmen budget, you should have that. Can you pull that up? I don't know if folks were able to print that out.
Madam Chair, can we take a quick recess?
Yes. Can we take a 5-minute break? We'll go ahead and take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back and do.
It's my tiny little squirrel bladder, sorry.
The one thing before you even go into the CIP, the one thing that got added that we didn't really discuss was that $4,000 of the library. That was an ARPA project that we put aside for 3 years. And this that money had been put aside to be used over 3 years. So this is just using what prior boards had put aside for this purpose. It does have an end date, in which case it would be
What was that?
It was for life work, right? Was that the right-
It was $4,000? Did you say?
$4,000.
Okay. Yeah. You had me at 4,000, but.
But it did come in, and that was just one of the errors we found. Thank you to, I think it was Melissa who found that, or Amy, I don't know. Amy found that one, okay. Lisa found that, I don't know.
Somebody found it. It's a team effort.
All right, so one of the, oh, there we go, sorry, thank you. One of the things for members of the public, our board took a look at bonding and how much bonding we can do each year to keep debt service down and within our guidelines. Our guideline, again, is target debt service at 7% or lower, but not to exceed 8%. We want to get that as low as we can because we're thinking in the long term, we're going to need to fund Squadron Line. And to do that, our debt service needs to be way, way down so that we have capacity when Squadron Line comes up to jump that up. That doesn't mean our taxes are going to go down because as debt service goes down, we're going to increase our cash for capital and keep that level debt service line at about 8 or 9 million. So that number will stay the same, but the amount we're bonding for, we're going to try and get down, down, down. So anything we can do to get it below 5 million a year that we're bonding for, we're looking to the help from our friends at the Board of Selectmen to get the bonding level down. Doesn't mean we're not going to do capital. We're going to fill that in with cash, but we've got to get that down if we're going to do Squadron Line. So we did ask Mark and his team to go back. That means a lot of capital is not going to get funded under this plan or at this point, which means they're going to be scrambling for grants. If there's extra reserves could be used for some of that, but as we talked about, we're using reserves to keep the mill rate down, so that money is not available to fund some of these capital projects that are not funded. So, Melissa, why don't you walk us through what is funded, and then we'll go through the unfunded.
Sure. So the exercise, as Lisa said, that we went through was to go through and make sure that on 2-year basis, because we do bond for 2 years worth of projects at a time. And based on our debt issuance schedule, we'd be looking at fiscal year 26 plus fiscal year 27, that those amounts are roughly 10 million. Same thing with 28 and 29. And then the fiscal year 30 year would be lumped with the year after. So the exercise was to go through and basically pull out projects to get to that level of bonding. So it might make sense just to look at the unfunded category first, actually. As Wendy said in her presentation, it's not that these are no longer needs, it's just that in order to make that model work, this is what we needed to do. So we would look to reevaluate and reprioritize in the coming years in terms of what our needs are. And as you said, Lisa, looking at alternative funding sources, grants, possible use of reserves, that kind of thing. So this is basically at the bottom of the plan now is an unfunded category. And again, as Wendy said, we didn't completely delete these things. They're still showing up because they are still needs. But that's how
Melissa,
we went through that exercise.
Can you take the time to go through and just say what they are?
The those, sure.
For 20, let's just do 25, 26.
25, 26, sure. So the first one on there was the House Rest Pond Bridge and Dam. That's an engineering project. Tom Rick, is he still here? You're still here? Hello, okay. So I don't know if you want to talk about them or if you want me to just mention them first.
Let's just go through and then we'll ask if there are questions on them.
Sure. And then the paving and parking for recreational facilities, that's all obviously Culture Parks and Rec. We have security and fire alarm upgrades. That was part of the town facilities master plan. That's something we have bumped out before. Highway street sweeper, that is something that was actually showing up in year 1 of the plan that we had already bumped out. Site improvements and dumpster canopies at the landfill, I believe that's part of a state mandate on how we are covering certain things, which Tom could also speak to. The roof project at Henry James, just because of the dollar value, we listed that as unfunded. There is, a partial reimbursement from the state on those projects. And then 2 projects at the high school in regards to athletic facilities, so the stadium facilities and the grass field reallocation.
Melissa, are any of those new projects? Those are just taking care of existing assets, is that correct?
That is correct, although Jason, you could probably weigh in on these high school projects.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
I believe so. I'm not quite sure about the Board of Ed projects, those 2, the stadium facility as well as the grass field reallocation. I think grass field is new projects.
You don't have grass on those?
It's a reallocation of the field, so adding 2 football fields into what's currently a soccer field.
But it's a field to field?
Yeah, it'd be a change of use, a reconstitution.
And for the locker room, is that a new locker room or do we have a locker room?
That's the sports facility for which?
That one's in 27, the locker room remodel. The fiscal year 26 project is this.
The 900 The 420 is a renovation.
So there would be a new locker room added?
No, the 420 is a renovation of that space.
But
the 980?
what about the 980?
That's a new facility, structure, bathrooms, serve the fields.
So you would add a new building?
Yes.
Okay. And then the stadium facility phases the 2,500? Or is that, no, that's the roof, right? 2,500 is the roof?
That's the new roof.
Okay.
0.5, correct, yep.
Amy, what progress are we making in getting the audit on the Henry James project? That was about 2 million that was there.
Still waiting on 2 million. We keep sending them emails. We haven't really had anything past, I think a couple of months ago, we had a response. They're in audit, we're going back and forth on it at least.
Are they in the audit now? They're doing that?
They're in the final closeout. So after the final closeout, there should be an audit. It's just slow go. I mean, we've gone back and forth with them. At least we're in discussions now about what should be funded, what shouldn't be funded, but it's a slow back and forth.
Is there anything, could we get Melissa and Lisa Seminara I'm Melissa Osborne and Lisa Seminara, maybe it's worth reaching out to them, see what they can do. Okay, because that's $2 million right there, that would help us. Melissa, can you continue us on into 27 and 28?
Sure, so for 27, the construction phase of that House Rest Pond Bridge and Dam, Curtis Park parking improvements that would fall under Parks and Rec, as well as the paving of neighborhood paths and trails, and the athletic field complex.
What is that?
Are you still here? You're still here. That was the one that said Meadowwood initially under.
That is for future athletic field build-out. It could be, I guess, one particular location, or if there was another alternate site. That's not fully funding the project. That would be with the community support from the youth sports organizations in town funding a portion of it.
Lisa, that was, it did say Meadowwood. I remember there was a
Yeah.
proposal.
Okay.
Then we have the town hall roof. Was that just a roof that's not a roof replacement, Tom, is it?
It's partial.
Partial replacement. And then the second phase of the site improvements at the landfill. DPW facility upkeep project, that's part one of probably the design phase of that project for the first year, with the construction in the second year. High school electrical project, and then the high school locker room remodel, which Jason just touched on, and then exterior windows and doors for Tooten Hill School. Let's see, 2028, we've got a project here at the library for enclosing the teen space. Again, breaking out design and construction there. Mechanical and electrical upgrades here at the library, phase 1 of 2, showing 28 and 29. Simsbury Farms lighting, that's phase 2 of a project that was done a few years back, correct?
Yeah, that would be for the tennis court parking lot lights that weren't, and the playground lights that weren't done before as part of the project that was done on the golf course exit road. That wasn't done as part of the last project, and electrical work through, if possible, adding electrical outlets to the poles that were done in phase 1
Okay, touched on the DPW facility upkeep project, as well as the Henry James roof. That's 3 phases, so you're seeing.
Listen, I'm having trouble hearing you.
Oh,
Could
sorry.
you either speak a little louder or bring the mic in closer?
The Henry James roof, that's 3 phases, so there's expenditures showing every other year here, so that was the second phase. Fiscal year 29, that's where we had that large projection for the community center and police facility, which were 2 separate projects that we combined together. So obviously a large one there. Second phase of enclosing the teen space, as well as the mechanicals and electrical upgrades. Reconstruction of the Simsbury Farms tennis courts.
Could we go back to the $35 million one? I was waiting to see if someone else was going to say that. But what is that? That's a lot.
wants to take it.
That's under unfunded. Under unfunded.
It only goes in one direction once it's unfunded.
Capital, you under. So there's been discussion over the years, but well predating me, as the chair knows, regarding an intergenerational community center that's been explored by Simsbury over a number of years. There's also a growing space concern for PD at Town Hall. Those were two needs for the out years that collectively would have been well over 50 million. So what we did in this, since we're doing it all as unfunded, let's put it out there so the public is aware that these are, needs, potential needs down in the out years.
Mark, can you take a mic?
I'm done. We combined them. 35 million. And if there's any questions, I'd be glad to take them.
Intergenerational, AKA what had formerly been known as the Senior Center, is now Intergenerational Community Center.
Have we got a location in mind for
No.
it?
We don't.
It just seems like you need to have like a business model for that, right? Like the revenues that would come to it and a whole bunch of things. So
yeah.
I don't even know what it means to put it on this list if it means nothing.
Can I say why it's on the list?
Yeah, sure.
It's on the list because it was a, Mark, I'm loud, aren't I?
Thank you. It's on the list because it was a Board of Selectmen priority in our goal setting. Whether or not we could afford it is one thing, but it was on the list in some of my early years, and it was taken off the list, and people wanted to know where it was. So in order to at least keep it on the radar, whether it's possible or not, it's on the list. That's the best answer I could give you.
By having it on the list, what does it mean here? Are we saying yes to it at all?
No.
Okay.
And what we don't see on the list is Squadron? Is Squadron on there?
No.
Squadron was showing up in year, when we went through that 12-year exercise, it showed up on the 12-year plan. I think it was starting in year 7 or 8. So that's why it's not on the 6-year plan.
So now let's just go through what you are funding, and we'll just do this year.
Okay.
To start.
Okay, so what stayed, you can see under Culture, Parks, and Rec, we have the PAC project and the Memorial Pool redesign.
Melissa, just members of the public might not understand the Performing Arts Center. Can you just go through the funding mechanism there? It's not all on the town.
Sure. So there are 4 different funding sources for this project. The town had appropriated in fiscal year 23, I believe, $350,000 to fund either a contribution to this project or permanent restrooms down at that facility in that area. So $350,000 has already been appropriated by the town as a contribution to this project. We got $900,000 from a state bond commission award towards the project. So that's the second funding source. The third is, you heard the proposal for $500,000 from capital reserve for the upcoming year to commit to the project. And then the remaining funds, which is just over $1 million, would come from the Performing Arts Center.
And just to be clear, the town's money isn't going to be spent until the Performing Arts Center raises that $1 million.
Correct, yeah.
So if they don't raise $1 million, or if the project price comes in lower, those savings will go to the town? Or does it mean that they have to raise less money?
TBD.
We would like the savings to go to the town.
I second that.
Okay, just to clarify that if the cost comes in lower, the money is to reduce the amount of bonding that the town will need, not to reduce the amount of fundraising that needs to be done. Is that the intent?
It depends on who you ask, but the intent of us, who is going to be working on a contract and agreement, would be that if the cost is lower, it should at least be a split, and the town should get a good chunk of that savings.
So can we get clarification for that for April 16th, please?
Well, we don't know if the cost is coming down, I guess is the question. We're banking on the 2.7, so we're using that cost.
And every other project we've had has had overruns.
Right.
Somewhat different on this project than on the other projects. This, we actually sent out a set of plans to a professional estimating firm.
We don't anticipate a savings, and if there were one, it would, in my estimation, be less than $200,000. We are hoping to start, we will start negotiations for a new operating agreement. We would deal with this as part of those discussions.
Thank you. We're getting a look from Mark Ornstein.
Oh, the microphone was acting up.
When something has been already approved, what does that mean?
If I could just add one thing, Madam Chair, with respect to this. There have been discussions regarding their ability to fundraise that large amount of money, which obviously is the elephant in the room and the concern of this board, and as it was the concern of the Board of Selectmen. I will say that if this additional $500,000 is funded, it's my view that their ability to fundraise is greatly increased, as it would be if we renegotiated a longer-term operating agreement. So I am more confident than others are that they can raise $1 million.
Great. Todd?
I thought I heard, was it 300,000 was already approved? Look at that, though. So it was approved prior, it was included in a prior budget, that was like.
So what happened is there was an initial, we didn't think there was any money to do the addition. So this was at a time when we didn't know this grant of $900,000 from the state was there. So there was an initial approval of a capital budget to add bathrooms, and that was about $350,000. That money was not spent, so it is available for this appropriation. Melissa will walk us through, I'll ask you to walk us through, she's been in consultation with bond counsel. The question put to the voters is going to be super complicated, and so I'm glad you asked it, because it's going to reflect prior approvals, funding from other sources, and the amount we're asking the voters to approve. It has to go to the voters because the total amount is so large.
Right.
So Melissa, can you walk us through what that question might look like to
Right.
voters?
Right, so any capital project any expenditure that's in excess of 2% of the current operating budget has to be its own separate question, its own question on the ballot, its own referendum. So as Lisa said, the size of this project pushes it over that limit. So that's why it's going on at all as its own question. So essentially, the question on the ballot is going to be phrased in a way where we're only appropriating, we're only asking the voters to approve the $500,000 from the capital reserve fund towards this project. We've already approved the $350,000, and the question will be, shall the town essentially approve this project in this amount to be funded from these sources? So if theoretically the question failed, the prior appropriation's still good. It's just that additional $500,000 from the capital reserve would not be approved towards this project.
Okay.
And you'll be able to see that question, hopefully. I mean, we can send those out very, very soon, in advance of the 16th.
Just publicly, I do want to thank the PAC for working with the town on this. It is a public-private partnership. We do believe that it's a gem of Simsbury. It brings the Hartford Symphony there, and it's essential to economic development, and really it defines the town. So I do want to recognize the PAC for their efforts on that. I personally will be writing a check to support this, irrespective of what the vote is, by this board, even if I probably shouldn't have said that, but I've been a past supporter of the PAC because it is a gem of the town. I guess I'm indicating that I'm probably going to vote to support this project. But I do want to say that part of what makes this town great is we punch above our weight. We do not have the grand list to support this, but we do have great volunteers and great people who are willing to reach into their pockets to make this community beautiful. And I want to recognize and thank them for that partnership. This is something we could not do on our own. So congratulations and thank you for that. And to our state rep who brought in $900,000, which we should never have gotten. So congratulations on that. Right, which we should get year after year, right?
Bipartisan support.
Yes, yes, exactly. Thank you for that. All right, and if we could go on?
Okay, so the next project that remains on the plan as currently proposed is the design phase for the Memorial Pool redesign, which you've heard about this evening, and that under the town manager's proposed budget was proposed to be funded through bonding.
I believe I understand from prior meetings that this $150,000 for a design is the first step in a project that's going to cost something like $1 million to build the splash pad, but we're hoping to use the design document to raise money.
Correct.
To that end, so that we won't bear the entire cost of the splash.
Well,
It could potentially be up to $500,000.
Right.
So we made the project for 75.
The design is needed in order to apply for grant money. So that is what the integral part of this, in order to get grant money to fund a good portion of the project, the design is needed. Plus, we have also asked, as part of this, the Board of Selectmen has stipulated that within that design, we don't want just, here's your carte blanche design. We'd like to see different levels of options of funding options within that design, so.
Can we go back to the PAC really quick? Are there other plans for the PAC? I mean, these are big numbers, right? Like, does this finish off the vision for what the PAC is supposed to be, or are there other $2 or $3 million investments? Because the thing, I don't disagree with anything you said, Lisa. That was the off-the-record comments, except for maybe the donation. I'll have to think about that one. But I guess it's not a revenue generator is the thing I always worry about when I think about the PAC, and it's an amazing thing for the community, and I'm not here to say it's bad, but at what point do you say we should have surcharges and things for people coming from out of town or whatever it is? And I know that's a whole can of worms, but I'm just sort of interested because if we're not going to have that conversation, are there 3 of these that are still coming? Like we're going to do another 3 million, or does this finish off the design and we're sort of where we want it to be?
I can take that one. Two questions and 2 answers. I don't think you're going to see additional capital projects. This is a pretty all-encompassing one in terms of what their priorities are. And so we're confident there. But to your earlier question, I would not take off the table it becoming a revenue generator for the town. And the negotiations with their board will commence as soon as we're through the budget process. And again, this would be tied to a much longer-term operating agreement that essentially looks at this with a fresh set of eyes.
Great.
I will also add that not only do I, from what I understand, this is the final completion of something that has been a long-term project of theirs to finally complete, bringing in potentially additional avenues for the PAC to be utilized, stored, but there's also potential use in off-season if they're potentially looking at maybe a full year season, but if not during the winter season, it does have the availability for town to utilize space there, since we do own the building, and have office space that is lacking in other areas, and meeting room space, and taking some pressure off the library here, which is a fantastic space, but they're in much demand. So that type of space will also be added as part of this project, so that the town utilization of it could potentially increase as well, not just from a revenue standpoint, but from a utilization standpoint.
Got it. Thank you.
Tom, one further question. They don't raise the money. Can you value engineer it down?
No.
Not at all.
There's not a lot to this building. I know originally when we looked at it, there was talk about, cost per square foot seems awfully high. You're renovating the existing building, and it's not a simple building. It's not adding on to the CVS where it's just a rectangular building. It was an architectural building, and with this, you're also enhancing what you already have. You're putting a new roof on the old portion of the band shell, because you can't just add in a partial roof connecting to a 20-year-old roof. We've looked at value engineering. There's really not a lot of fat in this.
Okay, so good luck to the PAC on their fundraising campaign. Okay.
I serve on the board, so I've been uncomfortably quiet during all of this fun stuff. But yeah, if it goes, they'll make the money.
Okay.
We'll raise it.
All right, let's go down and we'll see what else we're funding.
Okay. The pavement management program, that's our annual program there. That was previously showing up as 1.7 million. We reduced the operating transfer, so reduced the general fund contribution to this project from 200,000 to 100,000. The remaining funds for this project are bonds, and then the Town Aid Road Fund and LoSiP, which is another state grant. So that's an annual program. Not to skip, but the sidewalk reconstruction is another one of those annual programs. I don't know if there's questions on either of those. The Public Works truck, go ahead, Mike.
We were talking about, one of our citizens came in this evening, Mr. Hurley, and asked about sidewalks. Is that sidewalk in there?
That sidewalk is not in there. The sidewalk that he was talking about was the new sidewalk along Route 10.
Yeah.
Which that small section over the mighty Saxton Brook is the only section we haven't finished. There was a challenge during design, and that should be completed first thing as we get into the spring. We're gonna have a nice ribbon cutting. It's gonna be a great new event. This program here is to rejuvenate the existing sidewalk network we already have in town.
Gotcha.
Which is
So that's maintenance
pennies on the
stuff.
dollar compared to new sidewalks.
Yeah, fair. Thank you. Just, he asked to answer that question, so hopefully he watches.
Thank you.
Okay, the Public Works truck replacement and plow, we replace one of those annually, and that's funded primarily through the operating budget. And then we do plan on a certain amount of trade-in value for those vehicles that we trade in. The Terriffill connection, the East Coast Greenway Gap. This is the construction phase. I believe Tom can speak better to this, but would be entirely grant funded. These first 2 years you're seeing would be funded also through grants, but also through the PS's project savings. Really should call this another prior authorization from fiscal year 23. That was ARPA funds that we used to fund the design phase of that project. So $90,000 in 2025 and $90,000 in 2026 from that prior authorization would go towards that project. We've heard a lot about the Flower Bridge this evening. That is, again, we had 2 prior authorizations for that project due to market conditions and I believe other structural things that came up during the initial design phase that we are looking at an additional $495,000 that we would propose to bond to supplement that project. I'll note now, when bond counsel was going through these projects, he did recommend that we show the total amount of the prior authorization. So this 2.6 netted out $118,000 that we had already spent from that prior authorization. He said we should be showing the total cost of the prior authorizations. So when you have your capital resolutions before you on the 16th, that number will be increased by $118,000. Town Hall rooftop units, that's the HVAC system at Town Hall. Municipal site and safety improvements, that is essentially a second phase of the work that's been done, the site work that's been done at Town Hall. I don't know if there's any questions about that one, but. The barn facility repairs, Wolcott Road, that's the community farm. And the dam evaluation and repairs, that's the Stoddard Dam. The $171,000 proposed for fiscal year 25 would be the design. The reason for the break between the design and the construction phase is just due to permitting and the expected time frame for that. We typically don't give a whole lot of attention to WPCA, water pollution control, simply because it's funded by the sewer use fund. But if there are any questions there, I'm sure Tom would be happy to answer them. Moving on to the Board of Education, as Wendy noted, the Board of Selectmen did initially remove one of the projects, the district flooring. When we revisited the plan and reverted back to essentially the assumptions that were used for the budget modeling, we put that back in. So there are 4 Board of Education projects: district network infrastructure, the district flooring, the high school auditorium and amphitheater improvements, and then the Tooten Hills roof. And that rounds out the year 1 projects. I don't know if there's questions on those.
The out-year projects will be approved next year, but those are placeholders at this point. But they're more likely to be funded than the ones below the line. So those in terms of the priorities. I had passed out before, and I'm sure our board has seen these because we say this every year, and I may have taken arts, but the urgency of need criteria, that's our standard needs that municipalities use when evaluating capitals, and those include meets legal mandates, removes or reduces hazards, advance a government board's goals, addresses maintenance and replacement, supports economic development, improves efficiencies, facilitates new services, and offers a convenience. Generally, our board says repeatedly, our top priorities are public safety mandate and preservation of current assets in terms of how we think about capital. In light of those criteria and the ones I just listed, those criteria have been established and in use at least since the 1970s, so fairly standard among municipalities. I'd like to get some initial thoughts on what we're seeing here based on what is not being funded versus what is. And is there any, we're not going to take motions tonight, but we may have some indications we want to lay out. Does anyone have any comments on that?
Yeah, I'll start. I mean, I think it's sort of tricky for me because I feel like if we're getting inside of the 5% and everything and we're planning this stuff out, I get it. There's a lot of things in here that are nice to haves, not have to haves, though, I guess, when I look at it. We live in a great community, though, and I think some of these nice to haves are what people come to our community for. So making sure we're drawing the line in the right places and spreading out the timing of these things. You know, we've got some pretty expensive things that we have to keep up in our community, a flower bridge that we're going to spend $3 million on. We've got the PAC, which we spend a lot of money on, right? We haven't even, doesn't even come up here, but we've got a bunch of elementary schools. So there's a lot that we have that makes us really unique. Getting the timing right is tricky. And I think that's the thing I scratch my head on right now in my first time going through this is, are we getting the timing right?
Other comments from board members? Well,
I'd like to see the quarterly report before we solidify anything.
of course. So I'll be the hard thing. I'm looking at what's not funded, and I don't know how we can do a splash pad right now until the grand list grows. I support it. I support Tom and everything he does. I think he does a great job. I see 3,500 in fields that he wants to do down the line. I see pavement, repaving and parking improvements for recreation facilities that's not going to get funded at 850, and instead we're going to do a splash pad. If grand list grows, I'm all in. And maybe this is something we say to the Friends of Simsbury Farms, hey, can you do a capital campaign for this? We'd like to see you do that. I would be willing to fund some amount because we'll have to figure out what to do with it. But to me, as much as I love Tom Taberski, and I think he does a great job, and his commission is outstanding, what they've done with the parks and the money. We've invested a lot of money in parks, and we're continuing that investment in the CNR and the capital project. This is one that I don't see we can do right now, given where we are with our finances, where we are with the mill rate, where we are with projections of the grand list, and where we are with unfunded projects that, to me, fit the urgency of need criteria higher than that. And I understand that that's a hard thing to say. Doesn't mean you can't do it, but I will ask you to look for alternative financing. I suggest you reach out to our Congresswoman. There are federal earmarks. Simsbury has not gotten one in 3 years. They are funding projects just like this. I suggest you reach out to Congresswoman Hayes. The person sitting next to you could probably arrange that meeting. Simsbury is due for one of those earmarks. That would be the perfect dollar amount to look for there. The other thing, obviously, we'll look at steep grants as well. So that's my leaning.
Steep grant, 'cause that was in the plan.
Yeah.
Like half of it.
Steep grants are usually awarded every 3 years.
Okay.
We would be, I think, I don't know when the last one we got, was it 2022?
Yeah, we're looking to spend it this coming November.
Right. So we probably would not be eligible for that for a few years if the past is prologue. In the past, we generally don't get steep grants except once every 3 years. Yeah, Tom.
So Lisa, I appreciate that you mentioned the congressional earmark, because that's something we've talked about at the staff level as well. Tom Fitzgerald, and we mentioned it to Mark, and it's in the fact sheet I put together. What my understanding is they're typically looking for something that's going to be shovel ready because it's the quicker turnaround. So that's why we're looking for the design work to be done, so that we have a plan, we have an accurate cost estimate, so that we can go and get that earmark for the right amount of money. And it's a project, obviously, near and dear to their heart because, they're on a 2-year cycle, typically for some of these elected officials. They're gonna wanna see something that's gonna be able to be, results turned around fairly quickly. And with the design work done, we'll have something that we can take and say, this is what it's gonna look like, this is how it's gonna improve the community, and go forward with it. Whether you choose not to fund the full amount, if we don't get the earmark, that's certainly an option. But if you don't spend and I'm just advocating here, if we don't spend the 150, we don't know, we're not gonna do anything. We might as well, as soon as the major repair comes due, we're gonna be shuttering the facility, and then we have nothing. At least we're planning forward, we know what we have, we know what we can do, and we know what it's gonna cost at that point. And we've explored grant opportunities with the plans at hand.
Chair, if I could, just as a suggestion, I know, and I agree with the comment, we're, I guess, just a week or so away from getting the next quarterly report. Maybe as a compromise, and certainly we've had these discussions, we don't disagree with your comments at all. If the year-end savings is currently being projected at, say, 2.2 million, could we table this at least until your next meeting? Don't vote it down, you're not going to vote tonight, hopefully. If the year-end savings are, let's just say hypothetically, 20% higher than the 2.2 million that's being presented tonight, if the board would approve this, without it, we can't get the grant. The splash pad won't happen. The real issue is what are you going to do with the pool, which, as Tom said, is really the bigger issue. That's why I asked staff to change this from splash pad to Memorial Pool Project. Because really, if you deny it, you're telling the Board of Selectmen, you're going to have to make a decision to close that pool. And I know I'm new to town, but I think that decision might well have been made previously, and there wasn't the will to do it. I don't know if that's true, but.
It's true.
Okay, and let me tell you that in Poughkeepsie, they didn't do the splash pad. They approved a complete pool reconstruction that then went $1.2 million over budget. And they just spent $3.5 million on a pool.
Tom, at this point, people who use Memorial Pool is just the camps?
So the waiting pool is open to the public 6 out of 7 days of the week. It's open for 4 hours. It gets light attendance. It's mostly, the neighborhood walkers coming over. The continuing ed program uses it as well. Our day camp uses it when they're in the pool in the afternoon. The main pool is only open to day camp from 1 to 3, and then for public swimming lessons from 3:30 to 5:30 in the afternoon on weekday afternoons.
How many people use that for swimming lessons?
They're sold out. It's probably 30 to 40 kids each hour, and then we offer, I think, Saturday lessons over there as well. The day camp is going to be 110 kids, 120 with Board of Ed kids during their session this summer. For each of the 8 weeks the pool season will be open. The splash pad would be open potentially from May 30 from Labor Day to Memorial Day to Labor Day at a less cost than what we're paying for 8 weeks of the pool season.
Those classes go away, right?
Those swim lessons classes go away. We're already pretty much at max capacity at Simsbury Farms for swim lessons. What you also take away is the camp potentially lose is Camp Stuff to Do is our highest, the largest rec program outside of golf, outside of the golf course. You potentially, we're charging $245 a week at 110 kids per 120 kids per week. You potentially lose. Are we going to be able to charge $245 a week and not offer some kind of a water play option for a summer camp in the afternoon? You potentially lose that. That's one of many of you had kids who went through Camp Stuff to Do or have kids going through it now. It's one of the reasons kids go to Camp Stuff to Do. There's a pool or there's water play, and again, we're focused. If you ask me, I think you mentioned there's a lot of, I'm grateful for all the funding we've got the last couple of years. We've made big improvements into the rec facilities. Of the remaining projects that left, this is probably at the top of the list of what needs to get done.
Amy, how much is left in their parks? They haven't spent all their parks. They've been saving it. How much is in that?
I don't know offhand.
We get that? Well, we've been contributing to parks improvements for a number of years. It hasn't all been spent. There's probably a balance in there.
Yeah, we have. There's projects we're still working on here, so there is some fund balance, and we've done some projects under budget and turned some money back too. But of the remaining current projects, this is the one. I understand it's a big project. But it's I think in the scheme of things, 150,000 now is well spent to what you might get in return going forward. I mean, that's my 2 cents on it. But, I mean, we could put off things like parking improvements at Squatter Lot, at Curtis Park, that's paving the dirt lot. We had an engineering study done a couple of years ago. We have an accurate cost on that from 2 years ago. The repaving trails, neighborhood trails, that's, the town accepted all of these interconnecting trails in neighborhoods like the Mountain Farms neighborhood, and then over here off of Owensbrook. There's all these little trails that now, we accepted 60, 70 years ago, and now the tree roots are erupting through the trails. They've become unsafe. We get a lot of complaints about those trails. So that project was to go through and repave those trails. If the board doesn't want it, if there's no funding for it, at some point we probably should just tear them up and make them rustic trails, or block them off so nobody can use them, and we reduce the liability risk at that point. I mean, there are things we can eliminate out of those. I don't think you should eliminate anything to do with Memorial Pool. You have a facility and you have the utilities, you have infrastructure there to make something really special that people want and the community, will make use out of.
Tom, right now, Camp Stuff to Do is out of the Simsbury Farms Revenue Fund? Is that where that is?
Yeah, the tuition registration money goes in and out of the revenue fund. The lifeguards are out of the general.
So the general fund is supporting the special revenue fund for part of that cost?
Yes, the swim lessons cost goes into the general fund. So that's being put there.
Does the special revenue fund reimburse the town at all?
Not to my knowledge, not in the 20-something years I've been there.
All right, well, that's something, obviously, we've talked about not taking any votes tonight. We've heard some information. We'll have to think about it. Does anyone else?
I think Mark's, maybe we should just think about it in terms of the dollar amounts, because I think it's always dangerous for us to pick the project, to your point, because if it's better to do something else than this, but I don't mind the idea of saying, like, let's see where the latest numbers come in, and maybe it's 150,000 that we sort of earmark to say, if it's over, then we could do everything that we talked about. If it's at or below, that's when we would need to
Change the funding source from bonding to year-end savings, assuming the numbers are support that.
I think that's what, yeah.
I was gonna weigh in on that too. We originally wanted it to be cash funded because the point was, if we're not gonna do it, we're not bonding for a 10-year, we're not bonding for 10 years and then not doing it. And that was why, as a board, we thought using cash was a better way to go for that, because you're not locking in for 10 years. And if that was another option, that I think would make it much more palatable to just say, this is to do the evaluation, and then next year we look at the $1 million, do we go forward with that? So I think that's a good solution. Oops.
All this strikes me as classical. I mean, on any one of these lists, there's a constituency, and I think I put this at the lower end of the priorities just because you have to pave your sidewalks. You have to fix a roof where kids go to school, the things that you have to do. And then there are things like the Flower Bridge and the Performing Arts Center, for the greater good of the entire town, are quite high. This serves a more of a niche community, and if we can do it, fine, but it's toward the lower end of my priorities.
Could I just add on? I appreciate that comment, and if I may, I think that every 3-year-old in this town could use the memorial pool or a splash pad in its place. And so to refer to it as a niche, I'm just kind of surprised about it. I understand.
We're going to stop right there. We're not going to question people's motivations in this meeting. We follow Robert's rules, and we do have a level of decorum, so I'm not going to accept that as a comment. We'll move on from that. I appreciate your comments, but if you could not question motivations, that would be very helpful. We're talking about the substance of the projects.
I had
Todd,
a substantive.
the chair has not recognized you. Todd.
I wasn't sure how I felt about this from a dollar standpoint. Last meeting, I thought you did a really good job explaining financially what the alternatives were if we didn't do this, especially if you tried to rebuild a new pool. That was going to be similar numbers to what you said, Mark. I felt better from a financial standpoint after that explanation for moving forward, especially with the 150, because spending on 150 could save us multiple of that with bonding. So just solely looking at the numbers, I felt much better about what I heard the last meeting.
And Tom gave an estimate at, I think, at the Board of Selectmen meeting of what it would cost to just close it down and decide what to do later, and that was in the 24,000 range. Is that right,
I think
Tom?
you were saying, on the low end, 25, on the high end, 40. I think, Tom, I think you included that in your document as well, right? 25 to 40?
Yeah, I mean, just close it down and fill it in or whatever. I mean, whatever, Tom's a better estimate of what demolishing.
I'm a better filler-inner?
Yeah. But then we potentially we lose what I said about Camp Stuff, the Camp
Yeah.
Stuff revenue and.
Right, and the swim lessons, would those get shifted to Simsbury
We
Farms?
can only
is already
absorb
at
so many lessons
capacity.
at Simsbury Farms. We're already sold out in the morning and we have public swim in the afternoon, so you can't absorb afternoon lessons. at
So we'd lose a little bit of revenue there as well.
That, yeah, you
Yeah.
do.
Okay. All right, so we are not making any decisions tonight. We have a lot to think about. We'll make our votes next meeting, but we will at that point, to Mark's point, have at that point some better projections on year-end savings. And we'll see where we are in terms of projections. Okay, hate to do this, but we need to go to CNR.
Okay, so in regards to CNR, the only, we did not make any changes. The Board of Selectmen is not recommending any changes to the overall expenditure, so that bottom line number does not change. What changes after the Board of Selectmen presented to the Board of Finance and got guidance was in regards to, as Wendy mentioned in her presentation, where we're showing the funding for the proposed additional $300,000 towards CNR. That was $1 million overall, $700,000 for the Board of Education and $300,000 for the Board of Selectmen town CNR projects. So previously, that additional $300,000 was showing here in the traditional payback line. And what we did after that, our last meeting, was created a new line, starting to get hopefully not too confusing, but basically just trying to clarify that that additional $300,000 would be coming from that one-time bump from the Capital Reserve Fund. And we did not want to group it in with the other Capital Reserve Fund line. Of course, it's the same pot of money, but we wanted to break it out just to show that additional $300,000. So again, the overall expenditures and revenue number did not change. It was just where we're showing the categories of the funding. That's it.
And you just want to walk us through the projects very quickly? Just, we can show them, and then if members have questions about any specifics, we'll take those one-on-one. Otherwise, we'll just take a look at them.
Okay.
We've seen these in the past. There were no new ones added and none removed. Is that correct, Melissa?
Not since the last time you've looked at this, no.
So again, these are mostly small equipment, small construction.
Right.
The ones highlighted in bold are new, were not on the plan last year.
That's correct. Yep.
Want to scroll down and see if there's any more?
Yep. That was general government, just 2 under library. Oops, that should not be bold.
For members of the public, general fund operating transfers are found in the operating budgets in the department level. Once the budget take effect, they get transferred to the capital budget so they can be expended over 3 years.
Okay. Police.
Okay. Public Works, we've seen. Oh, wait, can you go to the project savings on the pickup truck? That was initially in the original documents shown as funded through TAR, and it's now at project savings. Can you just speak to that real quick?
Sure. So there were a few projects under highway that had prior authorized projects that came in under budget. There's 4 in total. I have them listed here. You can see my little cheat sheet. There was a pickup purchase, a tractor, the personnel lift out of the garage, and a plow truck that all came in slightly under budget. So between the 4 of those projects, we could fund this truck.
are all things we've seen.
There's nothing under engineering. WPCA, again, funded through the sewer use fund.
Culture Parks and Rec.
Yep, and this is the last category, so,
And, well, there's one more.
yes. There is one.
Kind of a big one.
It's not on here yet.
Okay. You want to go to the next page for Board of Education?
Yeah, so I do have a version with that. Sorry. So, here we go.
One of the things that happened in the Board of Education when they were going through their budget deliberations, and Jason, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is they took out the CNR payback. But they had originally had 700,000 in projects they wanted to fund, and trying to get their operating budget down, they took that out. Our board had committed in the previous meeting was to fund the full CNR amount, but we were not going to do it through the payback mode, but to use reserves. So this would then have to be added back into their budget, and so you'll see, Todd, when we put together all the motions, this will be one of the changes. We'll add it back in. It was always intended to be funded, but the funding source got a little skewed in the interim between the decision-making. So can you walk us through what's being funded?
Sure. So the additional 700,000 for Board of Education projects would show up as a category in the CNR plan. As I think was mentioned in prior meetings, the intent would be to use a portion of that 700,000 to fund the buses, that the bus replacements. That leaves 200,000 for additional CNR needs. What we've identified internally is, starting here, this is a critical need, the Henry James elevator piston replacement. That's something that absolutely has to get done. So we figured that was a good one to show here, as well as district-wide painting, which would cover a multitude of requests that come in from all 7 schools. So the idea here would be to use a chunk of money to cover those needs district-wide, since that would touch every school. So essentially, between that 700,000 and the 300 we just talked about, that's your additional 1 million in CNR funding.
So for members of the public, it's actually increasing the spending by 700,000, but it doesn't impact the taxes because we are using capital reserves. Are there any questions about any of those projects or concerns?
And it leaves us in an okay position on those capital reserves?
Pardon?
It leaves us in an okay position on those capital reserves? Again, I worry whenever we say that, because it's like we still have to fund the reserves at some point.
So Amy is projecting 2.2 million, Mark's
So it comes back to
projecting
the
20% more than that.
So all of this is included in what you discussed earlier, so.
Just want to connect that.
Yep.
No, that's a good question.
Thank you.
It's
But the
not
million-
in addition to that.
But the million wasn't in this coming year, it was in the following year.
In 2025?
The 2025 had regular use of capital reserves, because that's how we fund capital. We are using, there was going to be some leftover capital reserves, and we're going to use that money in future years to reduce debt service. So there was some capital reserves we were planning on using.
Right.
Some we're adding to use this year, and some we're going to assign, once we get more, to use for debt reduction.
Can you go back to the exhibit, if it's still a tab up there, where, when I asked about the 700 that was missing, you showed me where there was blank, and then, can you go back to that exhibit? Because I want to know what, there was another
So
million.
that 700,000 that I should not have sent you was my cheat sheet, but that was that 700,000. So
Okay.
now it's in capital reserves, yeah, so it's still being used, but not for debt service.
It's okay. Just cross your fingers that it's
I
gonna.
want to, in the line below that, there was $1 million transfer, I think,
To capital reserves, yeah.
different $1 million than we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Yeah,
All right.
so this is straight from reserves.
See that?
And this is the bond premium that we're gonna get in
Okay,
this
that's
year,
premium.
and we're gonna use it in out years.
So that's not all the amount of, you'll see, if you go under 2025, it looks like we're not using reserves, and we're not using reserves to reduce debt service, but we are using reserves in
Cover the
the
CNR.
budget. It's
Got it.
just showing some around, yeah.
All right,
Yeah, it's right here.
there it is. Okay.
You can see the 500 in capital, that's for the PAC, is that what?
Correct.
650 was for the Board of Selectmen CNR.
Correct.
200 ambulance, we were going to use that. Then 1 million, that's the 300 and the 700. Capital reserves, bond premium is a revenue into it, that's going to come in, not related to this year's budget, but will be used in next year's budget. And then the other, once we do year-end close, 26 should maybe come in after, if you flip 26 and 27. 27 is the year-end contribution, 229, we're gonna, then assign some of the balance, 2,300,000, and that's gonna leave us with 2.4 million for fiscal year 2026. 500 of those we won't spend, because we always try and keep a balance in there, so it'll leave about 1.9 million for the fiscal year 2026 budget that can be used going forward. We do not have a policy on how much we should keep in reserves and capital reserves. Glastonbury does about $1 million. We had talked about doing 500,000 because we have a healthy general fund reserve. But that is something we, to Eric's point, something we should keep in our mind. How much do we keep unspent and how
Right.
much do we spend down?
We should, but we should also make clear that it's not irresponsible to be using capital reserves, so that we fund it, as the chair mentioned earlier, by making conservative estimates about revenues and expenses, so that we can smooth out differences over years and we can be prepared for emergencies. But it would be a bad practice to simply amass capital reserves and not use them to reduce our taxes.
Absolutely, or to pay for needed capital. This is, the point to make, again, is capital reserves is funded from year-end savings, from conservative revenue assumptions, and good budgeting on the budgets. That money is then a revenue for the following year's capital. It also is a balance if we run into revenue glitches during the year where revenues didn't come in as we anticipated. But it is a funding source for capital. If we didn't do that, the next year we would have to budget a cash for capital, because we still have to pay for capital. It is a funding source for capital. It's not an exact funding source because it's going to come in differently every year. But capital spending is not an exact spending amount. We have variable capital that's spent every year, and as we just heard from Tom Taberski, some projects can be moved out a year, moved in a year. So that's why we do it that way. That is a not uncommon way many municipalities across the country do it that way. And it's worked well for our town. We would be looking at a 6.5% tax increase if we did not do it this way. So that's one advantage of it.
I hear what you guys are saying. I don't disagree with it. I just think it needs to be very thoughtful, and I think we're doing the right things to make sure we're not spending recurring things through this, because to me, that would be a dangerous thing to do, because we should be using revenue for that. And I also think we can't lose sight of the fact that all of this has to get baked into the fact that we increased taxes a lot last year, and even at the levels we're talking about, we're going to increase it 5% this year, and we're going to blow through the full 3.8, 3.7 of the 3.8. We're looking for that contribution to get us back. So I don't disagree with anything you guys just said, but I also don't want to make it sound stronger than it needs to be as well.
This is an unusual year. It's not an ideal, I would not use, if I had my druthers, I would not use the health reserves at the amount. We would put ambulance in the operating budget this year. Instead, we're going to do it next year or partially next year. And it seemed like a reasonable solution, given that we don't know what the actual needs are. If they need capital needs, if it goes towards an ambulance, it's more appropriate in the capital budget. So we'll see where that ends up. So that is a reasonable use, but I think it is wise to be cautious. And you are right to point that out. And if we did not have, if we were not looking at 6.5%, I would not be recommending some of this.
Yeah.
Are there any other comments people want to make on the budget generally?
So,
Mike?
Thank you. The fire district motor vehicle revenue piece of information that came to light today, the assumptions that we're now changing to be able to compensate for that pretty significant change just feels really squishy to me. I'm sorry to admit that, but it does. And my first reaction to that was, okay, we've magically found this money, why can't we find more? Right? Whether that's a realistic reaction or not, that was the reaction I had. And the what if I have in my head is, what if those assumptions are wrong, right? And should we be preparing differently for that $500,000 or 400,000, 360 something, I think I heard, 350 somebody pulled out before Amy did the numbers with the magic head calculator, which was awesome. So, should we be trying to prepare for that in a different way as a backup plan? And what does that look like, right? Does that mean that we're going back to the boards and having them make other decisions, right? I'm just trying to, I've been fixated on that pretty much since it came to light, and I just need to get that out there.
And maybe to extend on that, Mike, a little bit, because I'm in a similar spot to you. Does it make sense for us to request from the other boards to look at what, I don't even know, $200,000 or $300,000 would look like? Because I feel like a lot of this is late breaking. I think we should get really comfortable with it and understand where the puts and takes are. And I would rather have us have that at the ready than I think, because I feel very strongly, if you can't tell, I mentioned the 5% constantly. I think it's crazy for us to even think that we would go over 5%, given CPI and given what we increased last year. So I would hate to have us have to do line item stuff at the last minute and have us making that decision. So it would seem like it would be preemptive to that, to have that analysis complete with the other boards at 200 or 300. So it gives us some flexibility if we did look at this again and say, I think we're going too far. So I don't know, I'm trying to extend off of what you're saying, but it's just a way
much
for us
more
to
eloquently
echo.
said than what I said. Thank you.
Up to other members? Thoughts? Todd?
When we looked at that list of 3 or 4 things that we were all a little queasy about, and you pointed out that, yes, but they're risks we're willing to take. I looked at that and said, yeah, I don't feel good about those, but those are risks that we need to take in order to get down to the 5%. I also concur with the other Art that I get very nervous about looking at a 5% budget increase. And so I hope this was a one-time glitch, this speedy information we just had tonight. If it isn't, we do one of 2 things. We either prepare ahead of time, as you said, and look at some of these alternatives, or else we take a time out and think about this very thoroughly, do some homework on it, one or the other. But that's my take on your comment, Art. That point well taken. I hope we don't have to go back to the other boards one more time. But should we not make it, then let's be slow. Let's be thorough, and let's make sure that any additional cuts we have to make are well considered and well vetted.
What's the path that would happen if we didn't go down that path? And let's just pretend that we review this and next week we decide we don't like how we reposition some of these things. And so we're at 5.2 or whatever the number is.
So and Amy, you can correct me if I have it wrong, there are a few things we could do. We could pass a budget at 5.2. The second thing we could do is at the next meeting, we could either make line item reductions, or we could schedule a second meeting and go to the town manager and the superintendent of schools and say, please find us 350 or 200 or 100,000. Come back with your recommendations. So we would hold this third meeting. That would be the other option we could do. We do actually have a meeting scheduled on the 18th, I think, right? For that eventuality, if it was needed. Or sometimes just reaching bond council takes that long if there's a change made, just getting the motions fixed. So that would be an option we would have. I mean, one thing we could do is put Mark and the superintendent on notice that might happen, and they should prepare internally for that situation should it happen, unless we're thinking if our board feels like we are comfortable getting, I think you were at 497, Amy, is that where we ended up? If we're comfortable with 497, unless something happens, and I just want to warn the public, something does happen sometimes. Last year, we had to make a $700,000 correction. You saw this morning, we're making a $350 correction. These things do happen.
Sure.
So we could do it as a contingency. It's very hard for them sometimes to speak publicly what they would cut, because those can impact people and department budgets. But they could do that internally to be ready if we need to do that. That would be one option.
And just to clarify that, Lisa, that would not be a formal motion. That would just be giving them.
We could do it by unanimous consent, so that the board expresses its intent that way. We could do it by formal motion. If I would say not formal motion if we think we're comfortable at 4.9, and we're not going to take those steps unless the numbers come in worse than we expect, that might be a prudent way to do that. If people are not comfortable at 4.9, then we can take the formal motion and look for what would it look like if we reduced another $300,000 is a lot, depending on how you look at it, and it's a little, depending on how you look at it, right? So,
I'm sorry to interrupt, but what we're really talking about is how comfortable we are with the three adjustments that Amy has proposed for tonight. And so the question is, if we're not sure at this point that we want to adopt them, or that we're willing to make all three of them, then we would ask for some kind of alternative proposal, either from the finance department or from the two boards.
we could do that, yes, absolutely. The other alternative on top of that, Bert, is if the number come in worse than we anticipate.
Right.
I think Amy is feeling good that they're not gonna come in worse this year.
Yeah.
But we've seen things happen. So in some ways, this eventuality, the likelihood of it is less than it was last year, is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Substantially less, would you say? So at this point then, perhaps if people are comfortable with the 4.9, then we can proceed as planned and just advise Matt and Mark that if something happens, we are going to come back for time-wise to get the referendum out. We probably would need another hearing, and we probably could not do it on the 18th. That wouldn't give sufficient time for the Boards of Selectmen and Board of Education to meet. So we could do it that way. I mean, it's hard to know without running the numbers, although Amy is pretty good with,
So these numbers that were in here to get to the 2.2, estimated 3.5 in general fund savings, and then with the reduction of the Parks and Rec and so on, I think we're around 4 million. So I mean, these were conservative. So I'm confident.
Okay.
so we
I think given the amount of work that's gone into it and given the partnership that we have, I'd be comfortable doing it more informally, as you said, and just making sure that they're aware. Right? I think doing it in a motion is sort of implying that people aren't going to collaborate, and I think we will collaborate.
I concur. Agree.
So we'll say we're comfortable where we are unless the numbers come in or we find out new information that changes the mill rate. I think there's agreement on this board. We are not coming in with a tax increase over 5. Is that the consensus I'm hearing from this board?
Loud and clear.
Yep.
So if something changes in the numbers we receive between now and the 16th, that will change what we request of other boards, perhaps.
That's right.
Okay. Does that feel like I expressed the consensus of the board on that?
That's right.
Not me.
All right. Is there any other business for the good of the order until the 16th? Just to remind us what we're going to do, we're going to get from Melissa a list of all the motions laid out simply per Todd's request. And my recommendation is that you actually reach out to Todd on that, because he's a new member of the board, and it might be helpful to have a fresh eye, because what you see, the public is going to see. And if you don't understand it, the public's not going to understand it. We'd like it to be.
Just, that isn't actually what I asked.
Oh.
I mean, I didn't ask to see the motions. I wanted to see a schedule of.
That's what I meant, yeah.
Okay.
She has the motions, the draft motions. Those will be sent out.
I heard you say motions.
Oh, sorry, yes.
I don't want to.
The schedule of motions. You will get a copy of the motions. Those are almost ready. Melissa, if you could send those out as soon as you have the drafts done.
Sure.
Our whole board will do that. And then we'll get the summary sheet of the order when we're taking the motions, because there will be some taken in October, assignments and transfers in October.
Right.
And some motions will be from general fund reserves, some from capital reserves, two sets of reserves.
Yeah, I'm essentially picturing like a summary. Here's what we did, here's when what the action is and when we need to take it.
Exactly.
Okay.
Perfect.
Madam Chair, did we continue the public hearing, or do we need to?
Thank you, Mike.
You're
May I have
welcome.
a motion to continue the public hearing to April 16th, 5:45 at
6 PM here,
It'll be 5:45.
5:45, okay.
It's in this room.
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
It's in,
Aye.
We will continue the public hearing to the 16th. Tom?
it's in this room, not town hall.
Oh, it's going to be here? May I have a motion to amend?
So moved.
Second.
Okay.
Friendly amendment, yeah, exactly.
Friendly amendment. So by consensus, it is unanimous that we will continue the public hearing to April 16th at 5:45 in this room.
Good.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I move that we approve the minutes of our meeting March 19th.
Thank you.
And March 21st, or are we going to do them independently?
Next motion.
Oh, okay.
Okay, March 19th. Any, all in
second.
favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any changes?
I move that we approve the minutes of March 21st.
I'll second it.
Any discussion? I did send one minor spelling change to Amy that she'll incorporate, thought it becomes through. But other than that,
Well, now I'm satisfied.
Aye.
all in favor, please say aye. Those wishes.
I'll abstain from that vote.
Okay, all right. Those minutes are approved with the minor spelling correction.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.